The human was cooking from the inside, and the theater's cooling arms could not keep pace. Mounvey read the numbers off the wall slate and did not believe them. Core temperature climbing. Skin surface already past the line where thin flesh curdled. The 4 cooling arms had wrapped the patient in chilled gel and were pumping heat out of her as fast as their coils could carry it, and still the numbers rose. On the table, the small brown body twitched and steamed. Every surgeon in the room had backed a half step away from her without deciding to. Heat was the oldest fear their species carried, older than language, and the woman on the table was radiating it like a breached furnace line. "Cool her faster," the junior cutter said. His voice had gone thin. "Bring the ambient down." "Flood the room." "If I flood the room, I stop her heart," Mounvey said. "Her body wants to run hot. If I chase her down to a temperature we can stand, she dies on the way." The junior did not answer. He was staring at the woman's chest, where the burn from the ruptured coolant main had eaten a black channel across her ribs. That was the injury they had been called for, a laborer caught in the flash when the refinery's tertiary line blew. A simple burn debridement, a cooling protocol, a night in a cold cradle. That was the case as it had been logged. Nothing in the log had said the patient would arrive with her whole thermal system in runaway, generating heat the way a star generates it, faster than 4 industrial cooling arms could pull it off her skin. Mounvey set 2 of their long, boneless fingers against the woman's throat and felt the pulse there, hammering far too fast, the pulse of something that would not stop fighting even as it burned. Thin hearts slowed when they were dying. This one accelerated. "Registry file," Mounvey said. "Read me her world grade." The junior fumbled at the slate. "Crucible class, grade 19 on the Pyrrhic ledger, it says." He stopped. "Say it." "It says the scale stops at 20 for administrative reasons. There are no grade 20 worlds in the survey. Grade 19 is the top of the recorded galaxy." So this was a daughter of the hottest surviving world anyone had ever charted, and Mounvey was trying to save her by making her cold. That was the error. That had been the error from the first breath, from the moment the intake team wrapped her in gel and congratulated themselves. They had treated a fire as a wound. It was not a wound. It was a fuel line. "Take the arms off her," Mounvey said. The theater went still. Even the ventilation seemed to catch. "Adept." The junior's mottled skin had gone pale at the edges. "If we take the cooling off, her surface temperature is going to reach." "I know what it will reach. Take them off, all 4 now." He did not move, so Mounvey did it themselves, reaching across the table and folding back the cooling arms one at a time, and each time a coil lifted away the numbers on the wall jumped, and the junior made a small sound low in his throat, the sound Uthin made when they smelled smoke. The woman's skin was hot enough now that the air above her wavered. Mounvey could feel it against their own face from a full body length away, a pressure, a wrongness, the thing every creche song had warned them to run from. They did not run. They leaned in. "Get me the regulator suite," Mounvey said, "the whole rack, and clear the theater of anyone who is going to faint." 2 cutters left. They did not pretend it was for equipment. Here was the thing Mounvey understood in that moment, standing over a body that should already have been ash by every rule their medicine held. The human was not failing to cool. She was succeeding at heating. Her regulation had been knocked off its set point by the burn and the shock, and instead of shutting down the way an Uthin's would, it had done what her world had built it to do. It had opened every furnace she owned and thrown fuel on all of them at once, because on a grade 19 world the animal that survives the fire season is the animal that can outrun its own overheating and keep moving. Her body was not broken. It was doing the most human thing a body could do. It was refusing to stop. And it was going to kill her, because a system running that hot with nowhere to send the heat would eventually cook the very tissue producing it, unless someone reached in and changed the rule the system was obeying. That was the choice: cool her and lose her. Or stop fighting her heat, go into the regulation itself, and move her set point, teach her body that this temperature was not an emergency, that it could run this hot and call it ordinary, that heat was an operating range and not a death. No cutter in the Concord had ever done it, because no conquered species could survive the temperatures the procedure would leave a patient sitting at. The Uthen cooled. The Uthen had always cooled. It was the whole of their art. Mounvey pulled the regulator rack against the table with one hand and picked up the fine work with the other three. Log this, they told the room slate, because if it went wrong the ledger of sound practice would want every word. Patient is in thermal runaway secondary to pyrrhic physiology. Cooling is contraindicated. I am not going to lower her temperature. I am going to raise her tolerance. I am going to change what her body believes is safe. The slate logged it. Somewhere in the Concord's medical record, that sentence began to exist, and it would never stop existing, and Mounvey knew it and did the work anyway. The procedure took the rest of the shift. Drama, not detail. The ledger's later inquiry would want the detail, and Mounvey would give it to them line by line. But standing at the table, it did not feel like a list of steps. It felt like arguing with a river. Every time they moved the woman's set point up, her body fought them, convinced this was the fever that ended it, and every time they had to hold the new number and wait for the runaway to notice it was no longer being chased and settle. Uncouple the alarm from the heat. Tell the furnace that the furnace was the point. It was the most delicate thing Mounvey had ever done, and it was done in a room where the ambient temperature had climbed past anything an Uthen was supposed to endure, so that halfway through the shift Mounvey's own regulation began to slur, and they had a junior stand behind them with a cold cradle pressed to their spine, so that the surgeon would not pass out over the patient. Near the end the woman's numbers stopped rising, then they stopped falling. They found a line, high and steady and impossible, and they held it. The wall slate flagged the value red, then flagged it again, then, because the value simply refused to change, quietly reclassified it from emergency to baseline, which was the machine admitting it had lost the argument. The woman opened her eyes. They were brown and clear, and entirely too calm for someone who had spent a shift on fire. "Am I dead?" she said. Her voice was a rasp. It was not a question so much as a request for information. "No," Mounvey said. "Feels like I should be." She flexed one scarred hand, watched it move, seemed to find it acceptable. "It's warm in here." The theater was, by then, hot enough that the two remaining cutters were in cold cradles, and Mounvey was gray at the lips. "Yes," Mounvey said. "It is very warm in here." "Huh?" She let her head fall back against the table. "Feels about right." That was the first time Mounvey was afraid of her, and it was not the last, and the fear was not the old crush fear of heat. It was something newer and harder to name. It was the fear you feel standing next to a thing you have changed and do not yet understand, a thing that, when the whole galaxy's medicine said it should be dying, looked up and said the fire felt about right. Her name, the intake file said, was Nell Ryder. She was 23 standard years. Under occupation, the file listed a word the Concord had no clean translation for, so it had kept the human term and appended a note. A laborer whose function on her homeworld was to walk toward fires other people ran from. Mounvey read that line 4 times. They had rebuilt her to survive her own heat. They had not yet understood what they had built. The Ledger of Sound Practice convened its first review 9 days later, and it convened it standing up, which was how the Uthen held a hearing they intended to be short. Mounvey stood at the center of the cold-floored chamber and answered questions from a ring of senior cutters who had spent their whole careers cooling patients, and now had to decide whether one of their own had committed medicine or heresy. The questions were procedural. Had the patient consented? The patient had been unconscious and dying, so no, and the Concord's emergency authority statute covered it, which the ledger knew and asked anyway. Had less radical options been exhausted, Mounvey walked them through the cooling curve, and the point where every curve met the same wall, and watched the senior cutters do the arithmetic and disliked the answer. Had Malmve introduced an ongoing thermal hazard into a conquered habitat? That last one did not come from a cutter. It came from the observer seated slightly apart from the ring, in the gray-banded sash of the hazard registry, who had not been invited to speak and spoke anyway. The patient now maintains a surface temperature lethal to othen tissue on contact, the observer said. She sits, at rest, at a value the registry classifies as an active thermal source. Adept Malmve did not treat a hazard. Adept Malmve manufactured one and gave it legs. And a name, Malmve said. And a pulse, she was going to die. Many hazards begin as something we pity. The observer rose. He was tall for an Uthen, his modeling dark and even, his manner the particular calm of a person who has never once in his life been the one who was wrong. Warden Auditor Chelu Osk, Hazard Registry. I am attaching this case to my office. The ledger may decide whether the surgery was sound. The registry will decide whether the result may walk around. The senior cutters shifted. No one liked the registry. Everyone obeyed it. She is a person, Malmve said. She is a grade 19 physiology, running at a temperature that would ignite this chamber's flooring if she lay down on it long enough. Osk's voice never rose. That was the thing about him Malmve would come to hate. He never once raised his voice because he had never once believed he might lose. Persons can also be hazards. My office exists precisely for the overlap. She will be catalogued. She will be monitored. And if my assessment finds that she cannot be safely contained within a conquered population, she will be removed from it. Removed to where? Malmve said. Osk did not answer that, which was its own answer. The ledger ruled that afternoon. The surgery was declared sound, narrowly, on the emergency statute, with a censure note appended to Malmve's record that would sit there for the rest of their career like a scar. And the patient, Nell Ryder, was released into the custody of no one, because she was a foreign national with a valid labor contract, and the conquered had no law that let it cage a woman for the crime of surviving. But the hazard registry attached its seal to her file, and Chelu Osk attached his name to the seal, and everyone in the cold chamber understood that the case was not closed. It had only found the person who intended to close it his own way. Malmve found Nell that evening in the recovery ward, sitting on the edge of a cold cradle she was not using, wearing the ward's issue coat with the thermal lining torn out because, she said, it made her sweat. They catalogued me, she said. She had been told. She did not seem troubled. Guy in the gray sash. Osk. Yes. He looked at me like I was a fire he was going to put out. She said it without heat, turning her scarred hand over in the ward light, watching the old burn marks that had nothing to do with the coolant line, older marks, a lifetime of them, small and layered, the hands of someone who had been near fire her whole life and gone toward it every time. People have looked at me like that before, usually right before they need me. Need you for what? Nell looked up. In the cool ward her face was the only warm-colored thing, and her eyes were steady, and when she smiled it was small and it did not reach the fear it should have. For the part where the fire's already inside the building, she said, and everybody who can't take the heat has to stand outside and watch. Malmve did not have an answer for that. They filed it away, the way they filed away the sentence the theater slate had logged, as a thing that had begun to exist and would not stop. They did not know yet how soon they would need her. But the hearth was already failing, 40 levels below the recovery ward, in the deep heart of the city, where the caged sun that gave Vale Asan its heat and light and water had begun, very quietly, to slip its collar. Vale Asan was a cold city built around a captured fire, and it had never once seen the contradiction in that. Malmve had lived there their whole life, and had stopped noticing it the way a person stops noticing their own pulse. The deep city hung in the crust of Seth, a frozen world under a pale, wide sun, and it kept its million Uthen at the low, even chill their bodies loved. But the chill had to come from somewhere. Cold is not a thing you make. It is heat you move. So 40 levels down, sealed behind more shielding than the Conquered spent on anything else it owned, the engineers of Vale Asan kept a sliver of star. The hearth, a contained plasma core that ran the exchangers that pulled heat out of the whole city and dumped it, and in doing so gave Vale Asan its cold air, its cold water, its cold light, its whole cold life. The Uthan feared fire above all things and had built their civilization on the back of a caged one, and they managed the terror by never, ever going near it. The hearth ran itself. The hearth was tended by machines. In 400 years no living Uthan had stood in the same chamber as the core and lived, and the city liked it that way. Nell asked to see it on her 6th day out of the ward. "Absolutely not," said the Habitat Liaison, an anxious clerk named Vhet who had been assigned to keep the human comfortable and out of trouble and was failing at the second half. "The core levels are interdicted. They are lethal. The ambient down there would kill any Uthan in under a minute, and it would," he caught himself. "Kill me slower," Nell finished. "Yeah, that's kind of my whole thing now." She was eating because she was always eating. Malmve had learned that the new setpoint burned fuel like a foundry, and Nell put food away at a rate that alarmed the ward kitchen. She was working through a bowl of the dense gray protein mash the Uthan ate cold, and she ate it hot because she'd talked the kitchen into heating it, because cold food, she said, felt like eating regret. "Relax, Vhet. I don't want to touch your son. I just want to see the thing that everybody down here is so scared of. They built a whole religion of thermostats around it." "It is not a religion," Vhet said, wounded. "Vhet, buddy. You flinch when I asked for warm soup." Malmve, who had come to check the patient's regulation and stayed because the patient was more interesting than the paperwork, watched the clerk flinch again and said nothing. The registry came for her on the 8th day. Not Osk himself. Osk did not do his own collecting. 2 registry technicians in gray sashes and full thermal isolation suits arrived at the ward with a containment cradle on a float sled, a coffin-shaped thing lined with cooling coils, and a writ that authorized them to transfer the catalogued hazard-designated rider, Nell, to a registry assessment facility for extended observation under controlled thermal conditions. Malmve read the writ twice and put their body between it and the patient. "This is a medical ward," they said. "She is under my post-operative care for another 11 days. The registry does not have transfer authority over a patient in active recovery. Come back in 11 days with a court order or do not come back." The lead technician consulted his slate. The statute was real. Malmve had spent the previous night finding it. The technician's modeling darkened with the particular irritation of a functionary who has been correctly cited. "Warden Auditor Osk will hear about the delay." "Warden Auditor Osk knows where I work," Malmve said. When they had gone, Nell was quiet for a while. Sitting on the cold cradle she still refused to lie in. Then she said, "You bought me 11 days. I bought you 11 days. Why?" Malmve considered the question honestly because it deserved honesty. "Because I changed you," they said. "The scale calls you a hazard now because of a line I moved with my own hands. If they put you in a box for it, that is my box. I would rather it not exist." Nell nodded slowly. "That's a good reason." She looked at her hands again. She did that, Malmve had noticed, when she was deciding something. "For the record, I don't need the box to not exist. I've been in boxes. I'll be fine wherever they put me, because that's the other thing about my whole deal. I don't break easy. Never did. You just made it so the one thing that used to be able to break me can't." She flexed the scarred fingers. "But I appreciate you standing in the door. Not a lot of people stand in the door." Osk did not wait for the 11 days idle. He watched her instead, which was worse, and Malmve came to understand over the following week that the warden auditor's method was not cruelty but patience. He was building his case the way he built everything, by accumulation, one observation at a time, until the file was thick enough to close on its own weight. Registry monitors appeared in the recovery ward, small passive instruments clipped to the walls, logging the ambient the human raised around herself simply by existing. A technician came each day to record her resting temperature and note it climbing the ward's own readings a fraction with every hour she sat in a room. None of it was hostile. All of it was a rope being braided. Nell let them. That was the thing that unsettled Malmve most. She did not resist the monitoring, did not object to the instruments, did not once ask them to stop. Let him measure, she said when Malmve complained of it. Measuring's honest work. He measures me right, he's going to get numbers that scare him, and scared is fine. Scared people at least look. It's the ones who have stopped looking you have to watch. She was eating, of course. Working through another heated portion, the kitchen had surrendered without a fight. Now that word had spread through the ward staff that the human's furnace ran on fuel. The trouble with Osk isn't that he measures. It's that he thinks the measurement is the whole answer. He's going to catalog exactly what I am and miss entirely what I'm for. People do that. It's the most common mistake there is. The demonstration Malmve did not plan came on the 5th day, in the ward's own supply tier, when a coolant regulator on a medical freezer failed and did the Uthan version of catching fire, not flame. The deep city had almost no open flame anywhere in it, but a thermal fault, a bank of overloaded cells venting heat fast enough to cook the 2 ward technicians trapped in the narrow supply aisle beside it. The heat filled the aisle in seconds. The technicians went down. And the ward, staffed entirely by a cold species, did the only thing a cold species could do, which was stand at the mouth of the aisle in a rising wall of killing heat and be unable to enter it, exactly as their whole civilization had always been unable to enter the thing that mattered. Malmve was among them, at the mouth of the aisle, calculating the seconds an Uthan could survive the reach and finding the number too small, when a small brown shape moved past them into the heat without breaking stride. Nell had come from the ward at the first alarm, and she did not stop at the mouth of the aisle where everyone else had stopped, because the line that stopped everyone else had been moved out of her a week before by a surgeon's careful hands. She walked into the venting heat the way she walked into everything, unhurried, leaning into the weight of it, and she got a fist in each technician's collar and dragged them both out backward, one in each hand, through air that had already scorched the wall panels black, and laid them down in the cold at Malmve's feet, and turned around and went back in a second time to kill the power to the failed cells with her bare hands on a cutoff no Uthan could have reached. Then she came out, red-skinned and steaming and entirely calm, and looked at the ring of cold medical staff frozen at the mouth of an aisle they could not enter, and said mildly, "You want to move these 2 somewhere colder. Heat sick like that goes bad fast. You know your own people better than me." And she went to find something to drink because the furnace wanted feeding. Chelu Osk had been in the ward that day, taking his measurements, and he had seen all of it. Malmve watched him watch it. The warden auditor said nothing, made no note that Malmve could see, but something moved behind his flat calm. Not enough to change his course, not yet. The file was not thick enough yet, and he left the ward earlier than his schedule and did not come back for 2 days. And when he did come back, he watched her differently, the way a man watches a fire he has just seen do something a fire is not supposed to do. He saw, Malmve told her that night. He saw a thing walk into heat and pull 2 people out, Nell said. Whether he saw what it meant is up to him, that's always up to them. She flexed the scarred hand, deciding, and let it rest. Give it time. Some of them come around. Most of the ones who come around, it takes a bigger fire than a broken freezer. The 11 days did not run out the way the registry planned, because on the 9th day the hearth slipped its collar, and after that no one in Vale Asan cared about a writ. It began as a flicker in the city's light. Malmve was in the ward, arguing with the kitchen about whether it was medically permissible to give the human a portion and a half, when the cold daylight panels that lit every level of the deep city, panels fed from the hearth's exchangers, panels that had shown the same steady pale gold for 400 years, dimmed and surged and dimmed again. Every Uthan in the ward went still. Light did not flicker in Vale Asan. Light flickering meant the exchangers were struggling. The exchangers struggling meant heat was not being moved. And heat not being moved, in a cold city built inside the crust of a frozen world, meant the one thing the whole civilization was arranged to prevent. The city's voice came through every wall at once, calm and recorded and 40 years out of date, because no one had ever expected to use it. A thermal excursion has been detected in the deep core. Non-essential personnel proceed to designated cold shelters. This is not a drill. Then the recording stopped, and a living voice replaced it, and the living voice was not calm. Malmve got the technical picture in pieces over the next hour, standing in a command gallery they had no business being in, having followed the emergency to its center because a surgeon follows bleeding. The picture was this: a shielding array around the hearth, one of the great baffles that stood between the caged star and the city, had suffered a structural failure. Age, the engineers thought, or a flaw 4 centuries dormant. The baffle had cracked, and then, because everything down there ran at the edge of the possible, the crack had cascaded. The hearth was not going to explode. It was too well caged for that. It was doing something worse and slower. Its heat, which the baffles had spent 400 years pointing safely away from the city, was now pouring through the breach into the deep levels, into the maintenance warrens, the exchanger halls, the lower habitation rings where the city's poorest thousands lived closest to the machines that served them. The temperature down there was climbing past anything Uthan flesh could survive. And the only ones who could reach the breach and reset the baffles by hand, because the automatics were slagged, because nothing down there was designed for a living hand at all, were engineers who would die of the heat long before they arrived. "How long?" the gallery's ranking officer was saying, over and over, to an engineer whose isolation suit was already scorched from a single scouting run that had cost him 2 fingers to the heat. "How long until the exchangers fail completely?" 6 hours, maybe 8. The engineer's voice shook. "After that the city starts to warm, all of it, top to bottom. We're a cold world. We don't, nothing up here is built to lose the cold. We lose the exchangers, we lose Vale Asan. Not today, but we lose it. And the lower rings. The people already down there." The engineer did not answer. The gallery understood the non-answer. Thousands of Uthan were sealed into cold shelters in the lower rings, shelters designed to hold cold in a cold city, not to hold heat out of a rising inferno. Those shelters were counting down, and every route to them ran through ambient temperatures that killed an Uthan in a minute and a suited engineer in 20. Malmve was already moving before they had decided to. They found Nell in the ward corridor, standing at a viewport, watching the light flicker over the city's frozen towers, eating the last of a portion and a half she had apparently talked out of the kitchen in the chaos. "Your son got loose," she said without turning around. "Yes. People down there. Thousands. In shelters. The heat is rising toward them and no one who can reach them can survive the trip." Malmve stopped beside her. Their own hands were shaking, and not from cold. "Nell, I did not come to ask you this. I want to be clear that I did not come to ask you this." Nell scraped the bowl clean, set it down on the sill with the care of someone who did not waste food, and turned around. Her face was calm. Her eyes had the look Malmve had seen once before on the table, the look of a system that would not stop. "You didn't have to ask me," she said. "You just had to tell me where the fire is." The command gallery did not want to let her go. It was not mercy that made them hesitate. It was the registry seal on her file. Warden Auditor Chelu Osk had by then arrived in the gallery himself, cool and unhurried in his gray sash, while the engineers around him sweated and swore. And he stood at the ranking officer's shoulder and objected to the plan on the grounds that were, technically, correct. You are proposing to send an uncatalogued thermal hazard into the most sensitive infrastructure the conquered owns, Osk said. Her physiology is a matter of open inquiry. Her stability under sustained extreme load is unknown. We do not know what she does at those temperatures. She could compromise the exchangers further. She could reach the shelters, Malmve said, which is more than anyone in this room can do. You do not command here, adept. No, said the ranking officer, an old Uthan named Cyril Dunn, whose whole family lived in the lower rings, whose whole family was, at that moment, sealed in a warming shelter counting down. You do not warden auditor, and neither do you. I command here, and I have 4,000 of my people 12 minutes from cooking in their own shelters, and I have one person in the city who can walk to them. She turned to Nell. She did not soften. Cyril Dunn was not a soft woman. Can you? Nell had already stripped out of the ward coat. Underneath she wore the plain thermal-neutral layer the ward issued, and she was tearing the lining out of that too, because it trapped heat, and heat was the one thing she now had a surplus of. Show me the route, she said. Show me where the shelters are. Show me which ones are closest to going. And get me something to carry them in, because your people can't walk out through what I'm walking in through. They'll die in the corridor. I need a way to move them cold. That was the first thing that made Osk go quiet, not the courage, the logistics. He had expected a hero and gotten a foreman. The engineers scrambled. There was, it turned out, a solution to the second problem sitting in a storage bay 2 levels down. Emergency evacuation pods, cold-sealed, one person, meant to be dragged along guide rails to carry an injured Uthan through a hull breach. Insulated. Sealed. A person locked inside one could survive a trip through killing heat for a few minutes if someone on the outside could stand the heat long enough to drag the pod. No one had ever been able to stand the heat. The pods had sat in the bay for 400 years, a solution to a problem no Uthan body could execute. How many? Nell said. 9 in that bay, more elsewhere, but 9 you can reach. 9 trips then. She said it the way another person might say 9 flights of stairs. Per bay, okay, map. They gave her the map. Malmve watched her read it, and watched her read it the way Malmve read a body on a table, fast, total, sorting the survivable from the not. She was not looking at the whole disaster. She was looking at the order of operations. Which shelter first? Which route in? Which route out? Where the heat would be worst and how long she could be in it. She had done this before. Not this, exactly, but the shape of this, the calculus of walking into a thing that killed everyone else and deciding in what order to pull people out of it. Malmve understood, watching her, what the intake file had meant by the word it could not translate. On her world there had been a profession made entirely of this. Her world had needed enough of it to give it a name. The deep heat's going to climb the whole time I'm working, Nell said, not looking up from the map. So the far shelters first while the near ones still have margin. I go long, then short. Anybody argues I'm not listening. She rolled her shoulders. Where's the way down? I will take you to the bay, Malmve said. You'll die in the corridor same as anybody. I will take you as far as the last cold lock. Then you go on and I hold the lock. Malmve met her eyes. You changed nothing about my hands, but I can hold a door. Something moved across Nell's face, not quite a smile, something older than a smile. Yeah, she said. Okay, you can hold the door. They went down. The deep levels of Vale Asan had been built cold and were now something out of the Uthan's oldest nightmares. And Malmve felt the wrongness climb through the lift shaft level by level. A pressure against the skin. A taste at the back of the mouth, the ancestral scream that said turn back, this is the thing that ends you. At the last cold lock, a heavy thermal door beyond which the corridor already shimmered, the air already killing, Malmve stopped, because to go further was to die, and there was no courage that changed it. Nell did not stop. She put her hand flat on the cold lock's control and looked back once and said, count the pods as they come up. If I lose count in there, I'm trusting you to have it. Then she opened the door and walked into the shimmer, and the heat that rolled out of it drove Mounve back 3 full steps with an arm across their face. And through the wave of it Mounve saw the small figure walk away down the killing corridor without hurrying, without flinching, the way a person walks into their own kitchen. The door sealed behind her. Mounve stood at the cold lock and counted. The first pod came back 40 minutes later, and Mounve nearly wept at the sight of it. It came sliding along the guide rail out of the shimmer, a sealed cold coffin with a living Uthan inside it, an old spinner from the lower rings, alive, cold, terrified, alive. And behind it, one hand on the pod's tow bar, came Nell. She was not the same as she had gone in. Her stripped layer was scorched black in patches. Her skin had gone a deep angry red, the human color of a body pushed to its edge, and where the worst heat had found her there were blisters already rising and already, impossibly, beginning to close. Steam came off her. She had the tow bar in one blistered hand, and she was breathing hard. And when she crossed the cold lock into the merely frigid air of the landing, she staggered once and caught herself on the wall and left a black handprint on the cold metal. "One," she said. Her voice was a rasp again, the way it had been on the table. "Get him up top. The cold shelters near the lift are still holding. Put him there. Don't waste the pod. I need it back down." "Nell, don't." She was already turning back to the door. "Don't ask me if I'm all right. I'm not all right. I'm on fire. I've been on fire for years. It's just usually on the inside. This is easier." She coughed, spat something dark, wiped her mouth with the back of a blistered hand. "8 more in this bay. Reset the pod. I'm going back in." Mounve reset the pod. Mounve got the old spinner up to the cold shelter with their own hands and came back and held the door and counted. 2 came up at the 70-minute mark, a Warren tender and the child clinging to him, both alive, the child screaming from fear and not from heat because the pod had held. Nell was worse. The red had gone deeper. One of her eyes had swollen half shut where the heat had found her face. She drank 4 liters of cold water without stopping, because the set point that let her survive the fire also demanded to be fed and cooled between runs, or it would begin, slowly, to lose the argument even in her rebuilt body. Mounve made her sit for the 4 minutes it took the pod to reset, made her eat the dense cold mass she hated, watched her force it down because she understood fuel the way an engine understands fuel, and then watched her get up and go back into the shimmer. The third trip took longer, and Mounve stood at the cold lock through every minute of it, and did not know whether the delay meant she was working a hard extraction or lying somewhere in the shimmer with her own furnace finally winning. When the pod came sliding back, it held 2, a young Warren tender, and wedged into the pod beside her because Nell had refused to leave with an empty half, an old male too heat-sick to walk, packed in against a stranger by a woman who did not waste a trip. Nell came behind them on the tow bar, moving slower now, her breath a wet rasp, and she crossed into the survivable air and stood a moment with her hands on her knees before she could speak. "He wouldn't fit the harness," she said. "Old fellow, too far gone to hold on. I put him in with her. It's not to protocol. I don't care. 2's better than 1 when you've got the room." She spat dark again. "How long's it been down there?" "You have been in and out for 100 minutes, Mounve said. "Nell, your surface temperature is climbing between runs now. It is not shedding all the way back down in the 4 minutes. You are banking heat." "Yeah, feels like it." She drank and ate the mash without being told to this time, which frightened Mounve more than any argument would have. She was managing her own fuel like a machine that knew it was running long. "Banking heat's fine as long as I keep dumping it faster than I bank it. The day the math flips is the day I stop. I'll know before you do. Reset the pod." She was already turning. "There's a whole family in the next Warren over. I heard them through a wall." "I'm not leaving a family in a wall." The 4th trip nearly broke the pattern, because the 4th trip was the family, and the family did not want to be separated. And Nell lost time she did not have arguing with a mother who would not let her spinnerling go into a pod alone. Mounvey heard none of it. Mounvey only saw the result, which was Nell coming back out of the shimmer with the spinnerling wrapped against her own scorched chest, shielding the small cold body with her own burning one, having sent the pod up with the mother, and simply carried the child out in her arms through heat that should have cooked them both. Except that she had wrapped the child in the torn-off lining of her own lair. The insulation she had stripped away because she did not need it, given now to a creature who did. So that the child rode out of the fire cocooned in the one thing Nell had discarded on the way in. "Don't," Nell said before Mounvey could speak, handing the child up. "Don't tell me it was reckless. I did the arithmetic. Pod for the mother, lining for the kid, my body for the heat. Everybody came out. That's the arithmetic." But she went down on one knee, handing the child over, and stayed down longer than before, and when she rose there was a new unsteadiness in her, a sway she corrected a half-second late. 5 and 6 came out together on the 5th trip, 2 Warren tenders who could still walk, herded ahead of her through a collapsed section she'd had to clear by hand, and Mounvey counted them across the lock and counted her, and the counting had become the only prayer a surgeon knew. Somewhere around the 6th trip, Chelu Osk came down to the landing. He came in a full registry isolation suit, the best the Concord made, and even in it he could not approach the cold lock. He stood back near the lift where the air was survivable and watched Nell come out of the shimmer with another pod, watched the state of her, watched her hand off a living Uthan to the surgeon and turn around and walk back into the thing that was slowly cooking her alive. He did not say anything for a long time. When he finally spoke, it was not to Mounvey and it was not really to anyone. "That is the 7th, he said. "She is degrading, look at her, she cannot sustain this." "She is not asking your permission to try," Mounvey said. "That is not my point." And for the first time since Mounvey had met him, the warden auditor's flat certainty had a crack in it, a thin one, the kind of crack a baffle gets 400 years before it fails. "My point is that she knows she is degrading. She can see it in her own hands. She counted the pods. She knows there are 9, and she knows what the 9th one is going to cost her, and she went back in for the 8th. He turned his suited head toward Mounvey. "Why?" "Because there is a 7th person and an 8th, Mounvey said. "That is the entire reason. There is another person, so there is another trip. She is not doing arithmetic you would recognize, warden auditor. On her scale, the number of trips is just the number of people. It was never anything else." Osk did not answer. He stayed on the landing in his suit and watched, and for the first time in a career built on keeping a careful distance from everything that frightened him, he did not look away. The 8th came up at 135 minutes, and Nell did not stagger this time. She went down on one knee at the cold lock and stayed there for a moment with her head bowed and steam pouring off her back, and Mounvey crossed the line of survivable air as far as they dared and reached for her, and Nell said, without lifting her head, "Don't. You come past that lock and I've got 2 people to carry instead of 1. She got up. She got up the way Mounvey had seen the numbers on the wall slate get up off the floor and refused to fall, a system that would not stop, doing the most human thing a body could do. "For more," she said. "The near shelters, they're the ones about to go, short trips now, I go short." She looked at Osk in his suit for the first time, registered him, filed him. "You, gray sash, you catalog things right." Osk, startled to be addressed, said, "I assess hazards." "Then assess this." She wiped blood from her mouth. "There's a shelter at the end of the near corridor with the seal already failing, 12 people in it. It's going to open to the deep heat in about 20 minutes and everybody in it dies at once, and it's the farthest of the near 4, so by your math I should do the 3 closer ones first and let those 12 cook, because that's 4 trips and I've maybe got the body for 3. She said it flatly, a foreman reading a work order. "I'm doing the 12 first. I'm going to get as many of them out as I can before the other 3 shelters go, and if I only make it through part of the 12, then some of the closer people die that I could have saved, and that's the trade, and I made it, and I don't want to hear about efficiency from a man in a cooling suit. Catalog that." Then she went back into the fire, and left the warden auditor standing on the landing with nothing catalogued at all. Inside the corridor, Nell stopped counting in numbers and started counting in bodies, which was the only arithmetic that had ever made sense to her. The heat was a wall. It had been a wall since the first door. People asked her back home, back before all of this, what it felt like to walk into a fire, and she never had a good answer because the honest one sounded like a lie. It did not feel like pain, not at first. It felt like weight. Like the air had gained mass and did not want you to move through it, and you had to lean, physically lean, to make progress. And the whole time some animal part of your brain was screaming a single word with no letters in it. And the job, the entire job, the only job, was to keep walking while that part of your brain screamed. Everyone could ignore it for a second. She had spent her life learning to ignore it for an hour. And now the alien with the careful hands had gone into her body and turned off the part that turned to damage, so that the weight stayed weight and never became a wound, and she could lean into it and keep leaning until the leaning was done. The failing shelter was where they'd said it would be, at the dead end of the near corridor, its cold seal gone the color of a bruise. Through the small port in its door she could see them, 12 Uthen packed into a space meant for 6, their mottled skin gone slack and gray with heat sickness, the ones near the door already unconscious. The seal would not last 20 minutes. It would not last 10. She could feel the deep heat behind her getting worse as the hearth's breach widened, the wall of it leaning harder against her back, and she understood with the flat clarity that had kept her alive through 9 seasons on the line that she was not going to get 12 people out one at a time before this seal failed. So she did the thing you were never supposed to do. She changed the plan in the middle. "Okay," she said to no one, to the 12, to herself. "New plan." She got the shelter door open. It fought her. Everything down here fought her, and the heat that had been leaning on her back rolled past her into the shelter, and the conscious Uthen inside screamed, the high whistling scream of a cold species meeting the thing it feared most. And Nell put her scorched body between them and the open door and became, for a moment, the only shade in the world. "Listen," she said, in the trade tongue they drilled into her at the labor intake, the only Uthen words she had. "The pod carries 1, but the corridor to the lift 30 meters. 30 meters you can survive if you move now, if you move together, if you do not stop. I make shade. I walk in front. You walk behind me in my shadow close and we go together, and it is 30 meters and then it is cold. Do you understand? 30 meters. Do not stop." They understood. Fear makes some species freeze, and it made the Uthen move, and the ones who could walk hauled up the ones who couldn't, and Nell turned her back on all of them and faced the killing corridor and became the front of the line. She could not shield them from all of it. But her body between them and the worst of the radiant heat cut it enough, and 30 meters was short enough, and she walked backward and forward, hurting, blocking. A small furious sun moving down a corridor with 11 cold people crushed into the space behind her. And one she carried, the 12th, the child near the door who had already stopped moving, slung over her shoulder with an arm she could no longer entirely feel. They made the cold lock. 10 of the 11 walkers made it on their own feet. One went down at 20 meters, and Nell went back 4 steps into the worse heat and got a hand in the loose collar fold of his skin and dragged him the last of the way. And when they crossed into the survivable air, the whole group collapsed together in a heap of gray, shaking bodies, and Nell went down with them, the child still on her shoulder, and for a moment she did not get up. Maunve was there. Maunve had crossed the cold lock, had come into the edge of the killing air to reach them, the surgeon's own skin already blistering, and was pulling Uthen back across the line one by one with 3 hands while the 4th reached for Nell. Nell got the child off her shoulder and into the surgeon's hands first, then she let herself be pulled. 12, she said. Her voice was almost gone. "That's 12. The child needs cold fast. The child's been down too long." "The child is breathing. Nell, stop. Look at me." Maunve had her face in 2 hands, and the surgeon's hands were shaking, and the surgeon's own skin was cracking from the heat it had taken just to reach her. "You have to stop. Your body is at its edge. I built the edge, I know where it is, and you are standing on it. You have done more than. How many more shelters? Nell said. Nell. How many? She was already trying to sit up. Her hands would not close all the way anymore. The last run had done something to the tendons the heat had cooked, and her rebuilt body had not yet closed. She looked at them, distant, a foreman assessing a tool. The other 3 near shelters. Did they hold? Cyril Dunn answered from the landing, her old voice cracked. 2 held. The 3rd opened 4 minutes ago, 19 inside. We lost them. A pause. You saved 12 where you could have saved 9 closer. The math was yours. It was the right math. I will not forget that you did it against the man in the suit's arithmetic. Nell absorbed the 19 the way she absorbed everything, without flinching on the outside, and Mounvey, who was learning to read her, saw the flinch land somewhere deep and get filed with all the others. 2 held, Nell said. So the near warrens are clear except the 2 that held, and those 2 are stable. For now. Then it's over. Nell let her head drop back. Steam still rose off her in the cold air. It's over. Get me water and I'll help you carry these people up, and then somebody can put me in Osk's box. I don't even care. I'll sleep in the box. It is not over, said Chelu Osk. He had come forward to the edge of the survivable air in his scorched suit, and he was looking at a slate one of the engineers had handed him, and his flat voice had lost the last of its certainty. The shelters are the smaller problem, he said. I have been listening to the engineers while you worked. Pulling people out of the warrens saves the people in the warrens. It does not save the city. The exchangers are still failing. The breach in the baffle array is still widening. He checked the slate. In a little under 3 hours, the exchangers fail completely, and after that the deep heat has nowhere to go but up, into all of Vale Asan, and a cold world city that loses its cold does not get it back. Everyone you just carried out of the warrens dies 4 hours later in the cold shelters up top, along with everyone else in this city. The rescue was never the answer. The rescue only bought the argument time. The landing went quiet. What's the answer? Nell said from the floor. Osk looked at her for a long moment. Something had changed in how he looked at her. Mounvey saw it and could not yet name it. The answer, Osk said, is that a living hand has to reach the primary baffle mount at the edge of the core chamber and physically reset 3 mechanical couplings the automatics can no longer reach, because the automatics down there are slag. It is a task of perhaps 6 minutes for a trained hand. The primary baffle mount is 900 meters below this landing, past the warrens, in the antechamber of the hearth itself. He set the slate down. The ambient at the baffle mount is roughly 4 times what it is in the corridor you have been walking through. Our best projections say a suited engineer survives 11 seconds there. We have already lost one who tried to survive 12. He paused. I have spent the last hour running your physiology against that number because it is my function to assess hazards, and I built you a curve. You want the honesty. Here is the honesty. You can reach the baffle mount. You are the only living thing in this city that can reach the baffle mount. And my curve says that if you do not come back from it, not damaged, not injured. You do not come back. The mount is past even what he built into you. Nell was quiet. Mounvey was not. No, they said. No, there is another way. There is always another way. We find the other way. We do not. There is no other way, Osk said, and for once he was not being cruel. He was being exact, which was the only kindness his whole life had taught him. I have looked. It is my function to look. This is the assessment, adept, the city or her. Those are the quantities. I am sorry. I did not expect to be sorry. Nell got herself up off the floor. It took her a while. Her hands would not close and her face was a ruin, and she got up anyway, the way a system gets up that will not stop, and she walked to the slate and looked at the map of the deep, at the antechamber of the caged sun 900 meters down, and she was quiet for the length of 3 breaths. Then she said, "Show me the couplings, all 3. Show me exactly where they are and exactly which way they turn. because I'm only going to get to see them once, and down there, I'm not going to be able to stop and think. They gave her 20 minutes to prepare, because 20 minutes was all the exchangers had to spare, and Nell spent the first 3 of them refusing to die on Osk's schedule. "Your curve's wrong," she said. She was drinking water again, forcing down the cold mash again, and studying the shaft map with the swollen half of her face turned away from it. "Not the physics. The physics is probably right, but you built the curve on me walking down there cold and walking back cooked, one long trip, no stops. That's how your engineers do it, because your engineers can't stop. The second they stop moving, they're dead, so they sprint and they die at 11 seconds. I don't have to sprint. I can stop. I just need somewhere to stop that's cooler than where I am, even a little, even for 10 seconds, because 10 seconds of shedding heat is 10 seconds I get back on the far end." Osk stared at her. "There is nowhere cooler down there. It is uniformly lethal." "There isn't yet," Nell said. "Make some." It took the engineers 4 minutes to understand what she meant, and then they moved like their lives depended on it, because they did. The evacuation pods, the cold-sealed coffins she'd been dragging survivors out in, were, when empty, just insulated boxes full of cold. Stage them down the shaft. Every 150 meters, a sealed pod cracked open the instant before she reached it, bleeding its cold into a bubble of merely terrible air in an ocean of killing heat. Not a shelter, a breath, a place to stand for 10 seconds and dump heat and not die, 6 times down and 6 times back, so that the one long unsurvivable trip became a dozen short survivable ones strung end to end like stones across a river. "The pods can't take that ambient for long," an engineer warned. "They'll bleed out their cold in under a minute each. We time it wrong. She reaches a station and there's nothing left in it." "Then time it right," Nell said. "You crack each one the second before I get there. I keep a steady pace, you know where I am, you open my next breath just before I need it. It's a relay." "You've done relays." She looked at the ring of them, the engineers who had never once been able to go where the work was. "You just never had a runner who could take the baton in the fire." Malmve watched the engineers organize it, watched the cold city do the one thing it had never needed to do, improvise a way to keep a body alive in the place it feared most, and understood that the human had not just found a way to survive the descent. She had made the descent a job that the whole room could do together, so that the Uthen who could not go down there were nonetheless down there, in the pods they staged, in the timing they held, in the cold they spent. She had given them a way to carry the door. Malmve thought about that, and thought about standing at the cold lock with nothing to offer but a held door, and understood that Nell had done for a room full of strangers what Malmve had tried to do for her. Found the part of the impossible that the people who loved you could actually hold. Then the engineers scattered to stage the pods, and for 90 seconds there was nothing to do but wait, and Malmve and Nell were, for a moment, alone at the edge of the killing air. "You do not have to do this," Malmve said. It was a foolish thing to say, and they said it anyway. "I know. The curve." "I heard the curve." Nell was checking her hands, the way she did when she was deciding, except her hands would not close all the way anymore, and there was nothing left to decide. "Curves are for people who haven't made up their mind. I made up mine on your table, I think, maybe before. Maybe when I was 19 and I did my first burn over and the crew boss pulled me out of a black stand and I looked back at it and thought, that's the work. Not the getting pulled out, the going in. Some people are shaped for the going in." She looked up at the surgeon. Her ruined face was calm. "You didn't make me this way, Malmve. I want you to hear that before I go down there, because you've got to look like you think you did. You didn't do this to me. You took the one thing that could stop me and you moved it out of the way. That's all. Everything that's about to walk down that shaft, I brought with me from a world you've never seen. You just opened the door." Malmve could not speak. The old Kresh fear of heat was nothing next to this. The fear of a thing you loved walking calmly toward a number that said it would not come back. "If I don't come up," Nell said, You tell your ledger something for me. You tell them the surgery worked. You tell them it worked perfectly, because it did. Whatever happens down there, it isn't the surgery failing. It's the surgery doing exactly what it was for. A ghost of the small smile. Don't let them put a censure on you for the best thing you ever did. Then the engineers called out that the pods were staged, that the relay was live, that the exchangers were at 2 hours and falling. And Nell Ryder turned her back on the surgeon and the warden auditor and the ranking officer and the whole cold city, and walked to the mouth of the deep shaft, and began to climb down into the antechamber of a caged sun. Malmve watched her go until the shimmer took her, and then went to the engineer's station, where a screen showed a single moving point of heat descending through 900 meters of dark, and did the only thing left to do, which was witness. The descent took her out of the corridors she knew and into the raw bones of the deep, and Nell counted it in breaths. The relay held for the first 3 stations. She reached each pool of cold a half-second before she needed it, stepped into the bubble of merely unbearable air, stood for 10 seconds with her arms spread and her head back, and let her rebuilt body dump its furnace load into the borrowed cold, and moved on before the pod bled dry behind her. The engineers were good. She would tell them so if there was an after. They opened her next breath every time just as the last one closed, and she went down the shaft on a chain of 10-second reprieves, deeper than any living thing had gone in 400 years, toward a light at the bottom of the world that was not a metaphor, an actual light, growing, the glow of the caged sun leaking through its wounded shielding, painting the shaft walls the color of a forge. Between the second and third stations, the shaft itself tried to stop her. A maintenance gantry had warped in the heat and buckled across the descent, folding the guide rail into a snarl of glowing metal that no pod could pass, and that Nell had to climb around on the bare structure of the shaft, out over nothing, 900 meters of dark below her, and the caged sun's light coming up out of it, her hands finding holds on beams hot enough to have killed anything else that touched them. She lost time there. She lost a full reprieve there, reached the third station a beat late, into a pod already half bled of its cold, and stood in the thin remaining chill with her chest heaving, while the engineers' voices came thin down the link asking if she was still moving, still on the rail, still alive. Still moving, she said into the shaft for them, because she understood that the people holding the door needed to hear the runner's voice the way the runner needed the cold. Rails gone between 2 and 3. Tell the next runner. Whoever comes down here after me, they need to know the rails gone between 2 and 3. Then she climbed on because there was a bottom to reach and a sun to reset and no version of the arithmetic in which she stopped. At the 4th station, the pod cracked open and there was someone already inside it. She almost missed him. The relay pod had been staged empty. It should have been empty. But when it cracked, she saw a shape crumpled in the cold of it, a suited Uthan, the scorched isolation suit of an engineer, and for a wild half-second she thought the relay had gone wrong, that they'd sent someone down, until she read the suit's markings and understood. This was the scout, the engineer who had tried, hours ago, to reach the baffle mount and turned back at 11 seconds having lost 2 fingers to the heat. He had not made it back up. He had made it as far as this maintenance alcove, where a cold storage niche had given him a few degrees of margin, and he had sealed himself in and run out of everything except the refusal to die. And the engineers staging the relay had cracked open a pod beside a man they thought was long dead. He was not long dead. He was barely alive, and his suit was failing, and he had maybe minutes. Nell stood in the cold bubble with 10 seconds of reprieve bleeding away around her, and did the arithmetic that was the only arithmetic she had ever done. Down was the city. Down was 400,000 people, and the exchangers and the 3 couplings and the whole reason she was on fire. Up, even a little up, even carrying him to the 3rd station where the engineers could reach a pod down to him, was one man. The couplings would not wait. The exchangers would not wait. Every second she spent on the one man was a second stolen from the 400,000, and the curve that said She did not come back, had no room in it at all for detours. "Ah, hell," Nell said and picked him up. She carried him up. Not far, one station, back to the third pool of cold, the shortest distance that put him somewhere the engineers could reach. But up was the wrong direction, and every meter of it cost her twice. The climb, and the heat she took carrying a second body that could not shield itself, his failing suit leeching her cold reprieve, his weight in arms whose hands would no longer close so that she carried him hooked over her forearms like a man carries firewood. At the third station, she laid him in the cold and slapped the pod's beacon and spoke into the shaft, knowing the engineers were listening, knowing every word cost her breath she did not have. "Scout's alive, third station." "He's alive, he's in the cold, get a pod down to him from above. He can't climb, but he can ride." She was already turning back down. "I'm going on. Don't send anybody after me. Reset my relay, I lost time, the colds bled out below me. You have to restage the lower stations or I've got nothing on the way down." A voice came back through the shaft, thin and disbelieving, Osk's voice. "You went up, the couplings are down. You had the descent and you spent it going up." "There was a person," Nell said, as if that explained everything because to her it did. She went back down into the forge light, and the engineers, scrambling, restaged what cold they had left, and the relay that had been a chain of comfortable half-second margins became a thing of missed beats and short breaths. A pod cracking open a full second late here, another bled half-dry there, so that by the fifth station Nell was walking through gaps in the cold that the plan had never meant her to walk through, taking heat the curve had never budgeted. And the moving point of light on Moundvay's screen was pulsing now, brightening. The readout beside it climbing into values the machine flagged red, and then flagged red again, and then, the way the theater slate had once done, gave up flagging at all. Moundvay watched the point descend, and could not breathe. Beside them, Chelu Osk watched the same screen, and the warden auditor's flat comm had entirely gone. His modeling had darkened to near black, the Uthan color of grief, and he was murmuring to the engineers, "Faster now. Do we have another pod? Can we spare cold from the upper shelters? Can we get one more station between the 6th and the mount?" Recalculating, Moundvay realized, not the hazard but the rescue, running his careful curves in the other direction for the first time in his life, trying with everything his office had ever taught him to find the 11 seconds that let her live. "You cannot save the ones who go into fire," Osk said to no one staring at the screen. "That is the first thing the registry teaches. You catalog the fire, you route the living around it. You do not go in, because going in is how the catalog gets longer." His hands moved over the engineer's console. "I have spent 30 years keeping the catalog short." "She is trying to keep it short too," Moundvay said. "She is just doing it from inside." Osk looked at the surgeon then, one long look, and something in it had broken and reset like a baffle coupling. "Stage the last pod at the mount itself," he told the engineers. "All of it, every degree of cold we have left. Do not save it for the shelters. Put it at the bottom where she is going to need to stand and work, and give her a place to survive the 6 minutes it takes to reset the couplings." A pause. "It is against protocol. The shelters are the priority under protocol." His voice did not shake, but it was close. "Do it anyway, log that I ordered it, log my name." They did it. At the bottom of the world, Nell reached the antechamber of the hearth, and it was the most beautiful and terrible thing she had ever seen. The cage sun hung behind its wounded shielding like something out of the oldest part of the human brain, a light with weight, a light you felt in your teeth, and the cracked baffle array stood between it and the world. 3 great couplings sprung and glowing along the primary mount, the machinery that 400 years of Uthan engineers had built and tended, and never once touched with a living hand. The heat here was not a wall. It was an ocean, and she had walked to the bottom of it, and it was pressing on her from every direction at once, and the animal word with no letters was not screaming anymore because it had gone hoarse, because there was no part of her body that was not being told, continuously, that it was ending. The last pod cracked open beside the mount and gave her a bubble of cold the size of a coffin, and she stepped half into it, and looked at the 3 couplings, and remembered which way they turned. Osk's voice came down the link one last time, thin across 900 meters, the man who had wanted to box her reading her the sequence he had memorized from the engineer's diagram, so that she would not have to think it in the heat. Primary coupling first, the low one, a full turn against the mount, spin until it seats, then the mid-coupling, quarter turn and hold, then the high one, a pause, and then something the registry had no protocol for, from a warden auditor to a hazard he had catalogued. The city is counting your breaths up here, every one of us. Reset the sun and come home, Ryder. We will hold the door. Hold the door, Nell said, into the shaft and got to work. She reset the first one in 40 seconds. Her hands would not close, so she used her forearms and the heels of her palms and the whole weight of her body, bracing and levering, turning the great mechanical coupling the way she'd been shown on the map. One full rotation until it seated with a shudder she felt through the floor. Above her, 900 meters up, a needle moved on an engineer's board, and someone made a sound that was almost a sob. She reset the second one in 50. It was higher, and she had to leave the cold bubble entirely to reach it, had to stand fully in the ocean of heat with her arms over her head working a coupling that fought her the way everything down here fought her. And when it finally seated, she fell back into the cold pod and lay in it shaking and steaming, and did not, for 8 full seconds, believe she could get up. She got up, a system that will not stop, doing the most human thing a body can do. Somewhere far above, on the engineer's board, a second needle crossed its line and held, and the gallery that had gone silent made no sound at all, because 2 couplings seated meant nothing if the third did not, and every Uthan in the room knew it, and did not breathe, and waited for the last number the small human at the bottom of the world had left to give them. The third coupling was the worst, because the third coupling was jammed. She got her forearms on it, and it did not move. She braced her whole body against it, and it did not move. The coupling had sprung and then partly fused in the heat, its housing warped, and no amount of a small woman's weight was going to turn a thing that 4 centuries of engineering had oversized against exactly this failure. Nell stepped back into the cold pod's shrinking bubble and made herself think, which was hard now, because thinking took cold and she was out of cold. The last pod nearly bled dry, the ocean pressing in. Leverage, she needed leverage. The scout's alcove 400 meters up had been full of maintenance stock, and she'd registered a rack of conduit sections there the way she registered everything, but 400 meters up was gone, was over, was a trip she did not have in her. Down here there was the mount, the couplings, the pod, and her. And the pod. The evacuation pod was a coffin of metal and insulation, and its lid, when she wrenched it free of the hinge with the last strength her ruined hands could lend her forearms, was 1.5 meters of rigid alloy spar. A bar. A cheater bar. She jammed one end against the fused coupling's arm and set the other against the mount's frame and put herself on it. All of her whole body weight and the whole of the refusal she had carried down from a world 900 meters and 19 light-years away. And she stood on the bar in the full ocean of the heat with no cold left to step back into. And she screamed, not a word. The word had no letters, and the coupling did not move, and did not move, and did not move. And then it moved. It gave all at once, a grinding shudder that threw her off the bar and onto the burning floor of the antechamber, and she felt the third coupling seat through the deck against her cheek. And above her, 900 meters up, 3 needles crossed a line together, and the great baffle array of the hearth of Vale Asan swung back into its seat for the first time in 400 years, and pointed the caged sun's fury away from the city and back into the dark where it belonged. The exchangers caught. Malmve felt it before the boards showed it, a shift in the deep air, a change in the pressure of the wrongness, the ocean beginning by degrees to drain. On the screen, the readouts that had been climbing turned and began to fall, and the engineer's station erupted into a sound Uthan almost never made. A high overlapping keen that was their whole cold species weeping with relief. 400,000 lives uncooking level by level as the city's lungs remembered how to breathe. And at the bottom of the world, the point of light that was Nell Ryder stopped moving. "She is down," an engineer said. "She is at the mount, she is not climbing." "The relay is spent," said another. "There is no cold in the shaft, every pod is bled dry, she has nothing to climb back through." The keening stopped. The gallery went silent, because the city was saved, and the person who had saved it was lying at the bottom of 900 meters of killing heat with no way back, and a body that even rebuilt could only refuse to stop for so long. Mounvey was already moving toward the shaft. "I will take Cold down." "You will die in the first 100 meters, Osk said. He did not say it cruelly. He said it while doing something with the engineer's console, his long fingers flying, his dark modeling and his flat voice, and the whole machine of his careful mind bent now entirely to one number. "You will die and she will die, and we will have lost a surgeon on top of it. Stop. Think. We do not carry Cold down to her." He turned to the ranking officer. "We send the city." Cyril Dunn understood first. "The exchangers are recovering. If we vent the reclaimed Cold down the core shaft instead of routing it to the habitation rings, we build a front of survivable air and we drive it down the shaft toward her as fast as the exchangers can make it," Osk said. "We flood the deep with the Cold the baffles just gave back. She does not climb 900 meters through killing heat. She climbs up to meet the Cold coming down. We shorten the distance from both ends." He was already keying the order. "It will pull Cold from the upper shelters. The people up top will be uncomfortable. Some of the heat sick will worsen." His hands did not stop. "Log that I ordered it. Log my name on that too. Every part of it." At the bottom of the world, Nell felt the air change, and did not understand it, and then did. Cold, not much. Not yet. But the ocean that had been pressing on her from every side had, somewhere far above, developed a current. A thin, cool thread coming down the shaft against the heat, the first breath of a city remembering how to breathe. She lay on the antechamber floor with her cheek against the deck, and felt it move across the back of her neck, and understood that they had not given up on her, that somewhere up there people who could not come down were sending the only thing they had, and that all she had to do to meet it was stand up. Standing up was the hardest thing she had ever done, and she had spent her life doing hard things. Her hands were gone. Not gone, still attached, but the tools of them finished, the tendons cooked, the fingers curled and useless, and she could not have gripped a rail to save her life, so she did not grip. She got a knee under her and then a foot, and then she was up, swaying, and she started to climb the way a person climbs who has no hands. With her forearms, her elbows, her shoulders, her chin, hooking herself up the shaft's maintenance rungs one body length at a time, and every body length up was a body length cooler, was a step toward the thread of Cold thickening above her into a rope and then a river. She counted it in rungs. She had stopped being able to count in anything else. Rung and rung and rung. The forge light of the caged sun fell away below her. The killing ocean thinned around her. Somewhere in the 400 meters, she passed the alcove where she'd found the scout, and it was empty, the pod gone. And she made a sound that might have been a laugh. They'd gotten him. The engineers had gotten him out. The detour had been worth its cost, and she kept climbing, rung and rung and rung, up toward a Cold that was coming down to meet her faster now. The city pouring its recovered breath down the shaft into the dark to reach one small burning animal that would not stop climbing. They met in the 600 meters, the Cold coming down and the woman coming up, and when the first truly survivable air hit her she gasped and nearly lost the rung, because her body, which had held itself at its impossible line for hours, felt the Cold and finally believed it was allowed to fall. She did not fall. She climbed into the Cold, and at the last Cold lock, where hours before Mounvey had stood and held a door, there was someone waiting on the killing side of it who had no business being there. Chelu Osk had come down as far as a living Uthin could come, and then a little farther. He stood just past the last lock in a registry isolation suit already failing, already scorching, in air that gave him seconds and not minutes, because the front of cold had not yet reached the lock, and he had refused to wait for it. When Nell came up out of the dark on her ruined forearms, two spent to climb the final stretch. The warden auditor who had wanted to put her in a box reached down into the heat that was killing him and got his long fingers into the collar of her scorched layer and hauled. And it cost him. Mounvey saw it cost him. Saw the suit's gauntlet fail. Saw what the heat did to an Uthin hand in the seconds it took to drag a small heavy body the last 2 meters across a threshold. And Osk did not let go. He hauled her across the cold lock into the survivable air, and they went down together in a heap, the cold species and the Pyrrhic one, the auditor and the hazard, and the door sealed behind them on the drained and cooling dark. Mounvey reached them a heartbeat later, and did not know which patient to touch first. Her, Osk said through the pain, cradling a hand that would never again do the fine work his office required. Her first. I'm only burned. She is. He looked at Nell, at the state of her, at the small, ruined body that had walked down to the bottom of the world and reset the sun and climbed back out on its elbows. I do not have a word for what she is, Osk said. My whole office is words for things like her, and I do not have one. 9, Nell said. They both looked at her. Her eyes were half open. Her ruined hands lay in her lap like things she'd set down. She was smiling barely, the small smile that never reached the fear it should have. 8 trips out of the Warrens, she said, her voice a thread. 12 out of the failing shelter. 1 scout, 3 couplings, and 1 gray sash who came down farther than he had to. The smile held. That's the count. Somebody write it down. I always lose the count on the way up. Then she let the cold have her, and let herself, for the first time in hours, stop. She slept for 6 days, and the city that would have died without her spent those 6 days arguing about what she was. Mounvey spent them at her bedside in a cold ward that had for her been kept deliberately warm, a compromise the ward had fought over, because a warm room was an unnatural thing in Vale Asan, and because the surgeon had refused to let her wake shivering in the temperature that felt to her like eating regret. Her body healed the way her body did everything, stubbornly, at speed, refusing to stop. The blisters closed. The deep red faded to the brown Mounvey was used to. The scorched patches slewed and grew back, but the hands did not come all the way back, and Mounvey had known they would not, because there are things even a Pyrrhic physiology cannot undo, and what the 3rd coupling had cost her was one of them. The fine tools of her fingers were finished. She would keep the hands. She would not keep everything they had done. Mounvey was there when she woke and saw them for the first time, the curled fingers that would not straighten, and watched her turn them over in the warm ward light the way she'd turned them over the very first evening when she was deciding something. Mounvey braced for grief. Grief did not come. Nell looked at her ruined hands for a long moment and then let them rest and said, well, I was always better at the going in than the fine work anyway. I can rebuild them, Mounvey said. Not to what they were, but I can give you back some of the grip. It will take time and more than one procedure and it will hurt. Yeah, Nell said, okay. When there's time. She looked around the too-warm ward, at the cold city beyond the viewport, at the pale wide sun over the frozen towers that still stood because she had climbed down and reset the one they'd caged. It hold. The city. It held. The exchangers are stable. The baffle array is seated. The engineers say it will need a full rebuild in time, but it will run for now, and the deep levels are cooling, and the shelters are open. Mounvey hesitated. The lower rings lost 19 in the shelter that failed before you reached it. And the scout you carried up, his name is Teln Yarrow, lost 3 fingers and most of 1 foot to the heat, but he is alive, and he is asking to see you, and he has asked every day. Something crossed Nell's face at the 19, the flinch that landed deep and got filed. Then she said, 19, and I got the 12 next to them. A pause. That's the part nobody who wasn't there ever understands. You don't get to save everybody. You just get to decide the order and live with the order. 19. She said the number again, quietly, the way you set a stone on a cairn. Let the scout in. Tell anybody who lost a foot, getting most of the way to a job I finished, has earned a look at me. Teln Yarrow came in on a float chair, his suit traded for a ward robe, his three-fingered hand and his ruined foot wrapped in cold gel, and he did not know what to say to the small human who had found him sealed in a dying pod 900 meters down and carried him the wrong way up a shaft that was killing her. So he said the true thing, which is always the hardest. You went up, Teln said. The couplings were down. You spent your descent going up for me. My own crew ran the numbers. If you had not gone up, if you had gone straight down, your curve, his voice failed. You would have had margin. You spent your margin on a man everyone had already logged as dead. Why? There it is again, Nell said, mild. Everybody keeps asking me that like it's a hard question. She lifted one ruined hand a little, let it fall. You weren't dead, that's the whole answer. You weren't dead yet, and I was walking right past you, and I've got a rule about that. I've had it since I was 19. The small smile. Turns out the rule survives getting your whole thermostat rewritten by an alien. Good to know. Sit down, Teln. You're missing a foot, you shouldn't be hovering. Teln Yarrow sat. And that was the first of them. The first of the many who would come to sit by the small human's bed in the weeks that followed. The Warren tenders and the spinners and the child from the failing shelter, the one she had carried out, coming one at a time to look at the thing that had walked into their nightmare and walked back out with them slung over its shoulder. Malmve watched them come. Malmve watched the cold species that feared heat above all things line up to sit beside a person who was made of it. And Malmve began to understand that something in Vale Asan had changed that would not change back. The way a moved setpoint does not move back. That a city built for 400 years on the terror of fire had met a fire that came when it called, and would never again be quite as afraid, or quite as certain that fear was the only sane response to the burning worlds. The conquered, of course, drew the opposite lesson, and drew it loudly, and it fell to a burned warden auditor to stand in front of them and say they were wrong. The Hazard Registry convened its review of the Vale Asan incident in the great cold chamber on the administrative tier, and it convened it sitting down, which was how the Uthan held a hearing they intended to last. Malmve attended as a witness and sat where witnesses sat, at the low bench beneath the ring of registry senior wardens, and watched a proceeding that was supposed to be about a baffle failure become, within its first hour, about a species. Because the engineers' reports were unambiguous, and the medical records were unambiguous, and the survivor counts were unambiguous, and once all of it was on the record, there was only one uncomfortable fact left in the room, and the room could not stop circling it. A single human being, modified once, had walked into a thermal environment that killed the best-equipped Uthan in 11 seconds, had stayed in it for hours, had done work no machine in the Conquered could do, and had come back out. And the registry existed to catalog exactly such facts, and to route the Conquered safely around them, and so the registry did what its whole nature demanded. It began to build a curve. If one modified human can do this, said a senior warden named Asath, a pale old official whose whole career had been the routing of the Conquered around its fears, then we must ask what an unmodified population of them could do, and we must ask it as a matter of Conquered security. Grade 19. Crucible class. We have spent 400 years cataloging their world as a hazard to visit. We have never seriously cataloged them as a hazard to us. The incident at Vale Asan suggests we were incomplete. I move that the human homeworld's designation be elevated, that the registry formally classify the species itself as a strategic thermal tolerance threat, and that contact protocols be revised accordingly. There was a murmur of agreement in the cold chamber, the particular murmur of frightened people finding a shape for their fear. Malmve felt it and understood it and hated it, because it was the same instinct that had put a gray seal on Nell's file the first day. The instinct to look at a person who had survived something terrible and see only the terror, never the person. Cheluask rose to speak, and the chamber quieted because everyone had read his report and everyone had seen the state of his hand. He came forward with the ruined hand held against his chest, the hand that had dragged a human across a cold lock and would never again do the fine work of his office, and he laid his slate on the witness rail and did not read from it. "Senior Warden Asath is correct about the facts," Osk said. His flat voice carried the way it always had, but there was something under it now that had not been there before, something the third coupling and the last cold lock had put there. One human did all of that. His inference is also sound. A population of them, given the surgery, could tolerate environments that would end us. If the question before this registry is whether humanity could be dangerous to the conquered, the answer is yes, and I will not stand here and tell you a comforting lie, because my whole life has been the refusal of comforting lies. They are the most dangerous physiology I have ever assessed. I graded her myself. I built the curve that said she would not come back from the mount. He paused. She came back from the mount. So let me tell you what my curve did not measure, because it is the only part of this that matters, and it is the part this registry is about to catalog wrongly. He lifted the ruined hand a little, so the ring of wardens could see it. "I wanted her in a box," Osk said. "I want the record to show that. On the first day, I attached my seal to her file and I intended to remove her from the conquered population, because that is what my office does with a hazard. It contains it. It roots the living around it. It keeps the catalog short. I was certain. I am rarely anything else." And then a sun slipped its collar under a city of 400,000 of our people, and every certainty I owned went down that shaft with her. And I stood on a landing and watched the hazard I had catalogued walk into the fire 9 times to carry out strangers, and change her own plan in the middle to save 12 where the arithmetic said save 9, and spend her one survivable descent carrying a man we had already logged as dead back to the cold, and reset 3 couplings with a body that was cooking, and climb 900 meters on her elbows because her hands were gone. His voice did not rise. It never rose. And every single thing she did toward us. Not one act of that day was turned against a single Uthan life. She is the most dangerous physiology I have ever assessed, and she spent all of it, every degree of it, saving people who had catalogued her as a thing to be removed. That is the measurement my curve did not take. That is the variable Senior Warden Asath's motion leaves out. The chamber was silent. Mounve did not breathe. "You want to classify the species as a strategic threat," Osk said. "I understand the instinct. I invented my career out of that instinct. But a threat is a thing that harms you, and I have just spent a hand learning what these people do with the power to harm, and the answer is that the ones shaped for the fire run into it for strangers. You cannot catalog that as a threat without lying, and I am done lying to keep the catalog short." He set the ruined hand back against his chest. "If you want my assessment, here it is, and I will sign it. Humanity is not a hazard to be rooted around. Humanity is the thing you want between you and the fire. Grade them as high as you like. Grade them off the top of the ledger, but grade them honestly, and the honest grade is not threat. The honest grade is the one word this registry has never once had a column for." He looked up at the ring of frightened certain officials. "Ally, write it in. I will help you build the column." The registry did not write in Osk's column that day. Bureaucracies do not turn that fast. They turn the way the baffle array turned, slowly, against 4 centuries of inertia, needing a whole body thrown against the coupling before they give. But they did not pass Asath's motion either. They tabled it, which in the registry was as close to a reversal as a first hearing could come, and they ordered a full reassessment of the Crucible World designations in light of new operational data, and they entered Warden Auditor Cheluask's descent into the permanent record with his name signed under it, and his ruined hand pressed to the seal. And that was the beginning of the column, even if no one in the cold chamber would call it that yet. Malmve went from the registry hearing to a hearing of their own, because the ledger of sound practice had reconvened, and this time it did not convene standing up. That was the first thing Malmve noticed walking into the surgeon's chamber. The senior cutters were seated, in the posture of a body that meant to deliberate rather than dismiss. The censure note from the first review still sat on Malmve's record. The question before the ledger was whether it should stay there. The surgery was declared sound under the emergency statute, said the senior cutter presiding, an old surgeon named Vel whose hands had cooled 10,000 patients over a long, cold career. Narrowly, with censure. The censure reflected the ledger's judgment that the procedure, while it saved the patient, introduced an ongoing thermal hazard into a conquered population, and that a sound practitioner weighs the population against the patient. Vel folded 4 hands on the bench. The events at Vale Asan have caused this ledger to revisit that judgment. Adept Malmve, when you moved that woman's set one on the table, when you raised her tolerance instead of lowering her temperature, did you know what you were making? Malmve considered lying and did not. No, they said. I knew I was saving her life. I did not know I was making the only being in this city that could reset the hearth. I could not have known it. There was no way to know it. I want that on the record too. I did not build a rescue. I built a patient a way to keep her own pulse. Everything else she did with it, she brought herself. And if you had known, Vel said, if you had known on the table that the woman you were saving would be catalogued as a hazard, censured over, marked with a gray seal, threatened with removal from the conquered, made to walk down 900 meters and lose her hands to save a city that had spent 6 days debating whether she should be allowed to walk around in it, would you have done it? The chamber waited. Yes, Malmve said, the same way every step. Because the alternative was to let a person die on my table because saving her was inconvenient to catalog, and I did not spend my whole life learning to cool the dying so that I could refuse the one patient whose life required me to do the opposite. You asked me if I would do it knowing the cost. I did do it knowing a cost, knowing this ledger would censure me. I did it anyway. I would pay a larger one and not blink. Malmve paused. She told me something before she went down the shaft. She told me not to let you censure me for the best thing I ever did. I did not understand her then. I understand her now. Strike the note or leave it, senior cutter. I will carry it either way. But you should know it is sitting on the record next to the single finest piece of medicine anyone in this ledger has performed in 100 years, and history is going to read them side by side. The ledger struck the note. They did more than strike it. They did the thing the Uthan almost never did, the thing their whole cautious cooling art resisted. They opened a new practice. The procedure Malmve had improvised on a dying woman's table, the raising of tolerance where the conquered had only ever known the lowering of temperature, was entered into the ledger of sound practice as a recognized branch, provisional, hedged with every caution the surgeons could hang on it, but real, a door in the wall of their medicine that had not been there the week before. They named it after the procedure, not the surgeon, because the Uthan did not name medicine after people. But everyone in the chamber knew whose hands had opened it, and everyone in the chamber knew whose body had proven it, and the 2 names would sit under the branch in the record forever, the cutter and the crucible worlder, side by side, exactly as Malmve had said. It should have been the end of it. It was not, because a new branch of medicine is a door, and the conquered, having seen what walked through it, immediately wanted to build more of what walked through it. The request came through official channels, cold and reasonable and terrifying. If one modified human could save Vale Asan, then the conquered's other deep cities, and there were 40 of them, 40 cold cities built on 40 caged fires, were 40 disasters waiting for a runner who could take the baton in the fire. The conquered did not have such runners, but the conquered now knew how to make them. Would Adept Malmve, the request asked, consent to train the procedure to other cutters, and would suitable human contract laborers be identified and offered the modification, so that every deep city might have its own firewalker on hand against the day its own son slipped its collar. Mounvey brought the request to Nell, because it was about her body before it was about anyone's, and because there was no one else in the galaxy who had lived inside the answer. Nell was out of the ward by then, walking, her hands wrapped and clumsy but her body whole, and she listened to the whole request standing at the viewport in the warm room they still kept warm for her, watching the pale sun over the frozen towers. When Mounvey finished, she did not answer right away. She turned one wrapped hand over and back, deciding. "You want the honest version or the polite one?" she said. "The honest one, always." "Okay, honest is this." Nell turned from the window. "You can teach the surgery. The surgery's good. The surgery should exist. There are gonna be people who come off a crucible world into your medicine, dying the way I was dying, and your cutters should know there's a door besides cooling them into the ground. Teach it. Anybody who walks in like I walked in, half-cooked and running away, you give them the choice I never got to give because I was unconscious. That's not making a firewalker. That's saving a life and telling them afterward what you did and letting them decide what to do with it. I've got no problem with that." "But," Mounvey said, "but you're not asking me about the surgery. You're asking me about the other thing, the 40 cities and the runner in each one. You want to go find healthy humans on labor contracts and offer them the modification so you've got a firewalker on the shelf against the day your son gets loose." Nell's voice did not harden. It never hardened. That was the thing about her. Mounvey had stopped being surprised by, but it went very level, very flat, the foreman reading a work order. "And that one I've got a problem with, and I want you to hear exactly what the problem is, because it's not the one you think." "Tell me." "It's not the danger. People do dangerous jobs. Somebody's gonna sign up for it, and they'll know the risks, and that's their business. And I won't stand here and tell a grown person they can't take a job because it scares me." Nell crossed to the bed and sat, because her body still tired fast. "The problem is the word shelf. You said it without hearing it. A firewalker on the shelf. You're not talking about hiring people. You're talking about building people and keeping them. Same as Osk wanted to keep me, except his box was a cell and yours is a nicer one with a title on it. You want a modified human parked in every deep city, waiting on call, catalogued on the shelf, because it's more convenient than fixing your baffles." She let that sit. "That's the part I won't help with. Not because it's dangerous. Because it's the exact thing your whole civilization did to the fire in the first place. You caught something that scared you and you caged it, and you built your whole life on it running when you needed it, and never once asked it what it wanted the rest of the time. You did it to a son. I'm not gonna help you do it to people." Mounvey was quiet for a long moment. "Then what would you have us do? The 40 cities are real. The next collar is real. You saw what happens when there is no runner." "I saw what happens when there's no runner and no plan," Nell said. "Different thing. Here's what you do. You fix your baffles, really fix them, all 40, before they crack, instead of parking a person next to each one to clean up when they do. And for the day something goes wrong anyway, you don't build a firewalker and shelve her. You find the people already shaped for the going in, and every world's got them, every single one. The ones who ran toward the burning building before anybody rewired anything. Because that shape shows up in a species whether you engineer it or not. And you offer them the surgery and a real job and a way home. And you let them live like people the 99 days out of 100 when nothing's on fire. And on the 100th day you call, and they come, because that's who they already were. You don't make the runner. You find her and you pay her, and you let her go home after. The difference between those two is the whole difference between an ally and a tool, and your warden auditor just spent a hand learning it, so somebody in this Concord already knows the word. Ask him." Mounvey filed it the way they had learned to file everything she said, as a thing that had begun to exist and would not stop existing. I will bring your answer to the Concord exactly as you gave it, they said. The surgery, yes, as a door for the dying. The shelf, no, fix the baffles. Find the ones already shaped for it. Let them go home. A pause. They will not like it. It is less convenient than a person on a shelf. Most true things are less convenient than a person on a shelf, Nell said. That's how you know they're true. She looked at her wrapped hands. And Mounvey, when you write it up, put my name on the no. Not yours. You've got a censure they just struck. Don't earn a new one telling the Concord it can't own people. That one's mine. I'm a foreign national with a labor contract and nothing they can take, and I've been in boxes, and I don't scare. Let it be the crucible worlder who said no to the shelf. It'll carry more, coming from the thing they were about to build 40 of. And that was the sentence that traveled not down a shaft this time but up, out of a warm room in a cold city, into the Concord's records and then past them. The small flat refusal of a woman who had saved a city and then declined to let it thank her by building more of her. The shelf is a cage with a title on it. Fix the baffles. Find the ones already shaped for it. Let them go home. It went into the record next to the new branch of medicine and the struck censure and Osk's signed dissent. And it did what her whole day in the deep had done. It moved a set point that did not move back. Chelu Osk came to see her alone, 3 weeks after the deep went cold, and he came without his sash. Nell noticed that first, the gray band gone from his shoulder, the man out of uniform for what she guessed was the first time in 30 years. He carried a slate in his good hand. The other, the one that had dragged her over the cold lock, was wrapped the way hers were, and he held it against his chest the way she'd seen him do in the registry chamber. A man learning to live around a hand that no longer did what it was for. I catalogued you wrong, Osk said. No greeting. She respected that. I have come to fix the entry. It is the only apology my office knows how to make, so it is the one I am making. Sit down, Warden. Not Warden. I resigned the field authority. I kept the desk. He sat stiffly in the warm room he plainly found unbearable and plainly intended to endure. A man who has been as certain as I have been, and as wrong, should not carry a writ that lets him remove people from populations. I have spent 30 years being the reason the catalog stayed short. I would like to spend whatever is left being the reason it stays honest. There is a difference. It took me a hand to find it. Nell looked at his wrapped hand and at her own. Matching set, she said. I have thought about that. Osk turned the slate face up on his knee. I have thought about it a great deal, in fact, because I am not a man who was ever comfortable with the things I could not measure, and my hand is now a thing I cannot measure. It does not do the fine work. It aches in the cold, which in this city is always. And every time it aches I remember why it is ruined, and the memory is not the pain of the cold lock. The memory is you coming up out of that shaft on your elbows because your own hands were gone, still counting, still trying to give me the number so I would not lose it. His modeling darkened. I have catalogued a great many hazards. I have never once before that landing watched a hazard try to make my job easier while it was dying. It reorganized something in me. I do not have a better word for it than that. Reorganized. Yeah, Nell said. Fire does that, reorganizes people. It's why the ones who have been near it come out different. She nodded at the slate. That my file. It is your file. I have amended it. I wanted you to see the amendment before it enters the record, because you did not get to see the first entry before it ruined 3 weeks of your life, and that was wrong, and I am trying to stop being wrong in the specific ways I have been. He turned the slate toward her. She read it. The gray hazard seal was still there at the top. He had not removed it, and when she looked up at him he answered before she asked. I did not strike the seal, Osk said. You are dangerous. I will not lie in an official record to make either of us feel better. That is the old dishonesty in a kinder coat. You are the most dangerous physiology the Concord has ever catalogued, and the seal is true and it stays. He reached over with his good hand and scrolled the entry down to the amendment, to the new field he had built into a form that had never had it. But I added a column. It took me 2 weeks to make the registry's record system accept it, because the schema had no place for it and the clerks fought me, and I made them do it anyway, and I logged my name on the change. Read the column. Nell read the column. It was a single field and it had a single word in it, and the word was ally, and under it, in the small, dense script of a man who measured everything, was a line of assessment text. "Read it out," Osk said. "I want to hear whether it is true," said in your voice. Nell read it out. "Subject is a confirmed thermal hazard of the highest recorded order," she read, "and will, on the evidence of Veil Asun, expend the entirety of that hazard in defense of the population that catalogues her. Recommend the conquered treat her and her species accordingly, not as a fire to be rooted around, but as the thing you send someone to fetch when the fire is already in the building and everyone who cannot take the heat is standing outside, watching." She stopped. She looked up. "You quoted me. You said it in the ward the first day. I was not in the ward the first day, but the liaison logged it, and I read the log, and I did not understand it then." Osk's voice was very level. "I understand it now. I stood outside the fire and watched, and you were the one they sent in. I would like the record to say that is what you are, in a column the registry will have to keep forever, so that the next frightened official who wants to build a box for the next crucible worlder has to scroll past the word ally to do it. That is the apology. It is the only one I have. Is it true?" said in your voice. Nell was quiet for a moment. Then she handed the slate back, careful with her wrapped, clumsy hands. "It's true," she said. "Log it." A pause, and then the small smile, the one that never reached the fear it should have. "And Osk, for a man who spent 30 years keeping a catalog short, that's a hell of a thing to add a whole new column for. Took some going in. Maybe you're more shaped for it than you thought." Chelu Osk stood, and held his ruined hand against his chest, and inclined his head to her the precise degree the Uthan reserved for a thing they had gotten wrong, and meant never to get wrong again. Then he went out to file the column, and the word ally entered the hazard registry of the Uthan conquered for the first time in 400 years, attached to the file of a 23-year-old human with hands that would never fully close, and it did not come out again. The story of what happened under Veil Asun did not stay under Veil Asun. Cold cities talked to cold cities, and 40 of them were built on caged fires, and every engineer in every one of them had spent a career pretending the baffle behind the wall would hold forever. When the record from Veil Asun crossed the conquered, the breach, the shelters, the shaft, the small human on her elbows resetting a sun, it did not land as a curiosity. It landed as a warning that had already come true once, and the 40 cities read it the way you read the autopsy of someone who died of the thing your own doctor keeps mentioning. Maunve watched it travel from the one place they could see the whole thing move, which was the medical record, because the new branch of practice meant cutters from the other cities now came to Veil Asun to learn it, and cutters gossiped the way engineers gossip, and every delegation that arrived brought the shape of how their own city had taken the story. Some had taken it as fear, Asath's fear, the crucible worlder as a thing to be watched, but more of them, Maunve was surprised to find, had taken it the other way because the part of the story that traveled best was not the danger. It was the detour. It was the 12 saved where the math said 9. It was the scout carried the wrong way up a killing shaft. It was a phrase, worn smooth by retelling, that Maunve began to hear repeated back to them by cutters who had no idea the surgeon standing in front of them was the one who had first heard it in a warm ward, the one shaped for the going in run into it for strangers. It had become a saying. It had become the thing the Uthan said, in 40 cold cities, when they meant the specific and unwelcome truth that the most dangerous thing in the galaxy had walked into their nightmare and spent itself entirely on saving them. The registry regraded the Crucible worlds that season, and the regrade was a stranger document than anyone had expected. It did not lower Earth's designation. Grade 19 stood, Crucible class stood. The Pyrrhic ledger did not suddenly decide the human's world was gentle, because it was not gentle, and the registry had at last stopped pretending honesty and comfort were the same thing. What the regrade changed was the meaning of the grade. For 400 years, the ledger had graded worlds by how much they would kill you, and a grade 19 was simply the most likely to kill you, and the whole apparatus of the conquered had been arranged to route the living safely around such places. The amended ledger kept the number and added Osk's column beneath it, the same column he had built into one woman's file now built into the survey of worlds themselves. A field the clerks had fought and lost. A field that asked not only how deadly is this world, but what does its deadliness make? And under grade 19, in the survey of the human homeworld, some analyst in the registry with a careful hand had entered the finding that would sit in the conquered's records long after everyone who had lived through Vale Asan was gone. A world this hostile does not breed the timid. It breeds the ones who run toward the fire, because on a world of fire the timid do not breed at all. Approach accordingly. They are not safe. They are, when the fire comes, the only safe thing in the room. Malmve read that entry the day it published, standing in the cold ward, and felt the old crush fear of heat finally lie down in them. 400 generations of it, quieted at last, not because the fear had been wrong, but because it had, for the first time in the species' history, been completed. The Uthan had always known that fire ended you. They had never let themselves know the other half, the half a small brown woman had climbed 900 meters to teach them, that the same fire, met by the right animal, was the thing that walked in and carried you out. Fear of fire had built their whole cautious civilization. It had taken a crucible worlder to finish the sentence the fear had only ever started. And the sentence finished, changed 40 cities. The baffle rebuilds began that year, all 40. A conquered-wide program of the kind the Uthan undertook perhaps once a century, driven by the specific horror of having watched what a single failed baffle nearly cost. They fixed the fires before the fires got loose, which was the first half of what Nell had told them to do. And the second half they did too, slower, more reluctantly, because it required them to stop thinking of the going-in as a thing to shelve. The conquered opened a service. Malmve helped write it, and made them strike the word asset from the founding document 3 separate times before the clerks gave up, for the identification and hire of crucible world laborers already shaped for the going-in, offered the surgery as a choice made awake and not asleep, offered a real wage and a real contract and a way home, kept as people the 99 days out of 100 when nothing was on fire, and called on the 100th day. The way you call an ally and not the way you open a cabinet. It was less convenient than a person on a shelf. It was, as Nell had said, therefore probably true. Malmve rebuilt her hands over the winter, in stages, exactly as promised, and it hurt exactly as promised, and Nell endured it exactly the way she endured everything. They did not come back to what they had been. Malmve had been honest about that from the table onward, and honesty held. The fine tools were gone for good, the surgeon's grade dexterity that had once tied off a line or set a fracture, finished at the bottom of a shaft 900 meters down. But grip came back, most of it enough to hold and lift and carry, enough that Nell could close her hand around a rail again and around a cup again and around the tow bar of an evacuation pod again, which Malmve noticed she tested first, before the cup, before anything, the day the grip returned. She closed her rebuilt hand around an imaginary tow bar and felt it hold and nodded once, the way she nodded when a thing was acceptable, and Malmve understood what she had been checking and said nothing. She stayed in Vale Asan through the rebuild, because the rebuild kept her there, and then she stayed after it was done, because by then the city had made a place for her without quite deciding to. The saved came to see her still, not in a line anymore. The acute gratitude had cooled into something steadier. But on the days that mattered to the Uthan, the cold days and the turning days, there was a warm room in the medical tier where a small human sat, and the warren tenders and the spinners and the child from the failing shelter came and sat with her, and it became a thing the lower rings did, a small tradition with no name, the going to sit with the one who came in. Teln Yarrow came every time, on a foot that Mounvey had rebuilt as far as it would rebuild, and he had taken to bringing the dense gray protein mash and heating it for her himself, because someone had told him she liked it hot, and he had decided that a man carried up a killing shaft could at least carry up a warm meal in return. "You're restless," Mounvey told her one turning day, when the room had emptied, and it was just the two of them and the pale sun going down over the frozen towers. "Little bit." Nell flexed the rebuilt hand, watched it close, that old habit of deciding. "It's a good place, Mounvey, best I've landed. People are kind in that careful way you all have, and nobody's shot at me in a year, and the food's warm now if I ask." She looked out at the sun. "But I keep catching myself listening for it. The alarm, the flicker in the lights. Some part of me's still standing at the cold lock waiting for the door to open. I did 9 seasons of this before I ever left home, and then I came out here and did the biggest one of my life, and now I'm sitting in a warm room being thanked, and the shape of me doesn't fit the room. I'm made for the going in. You can't rewire that. You already rewired everything else and you couldn't touch that." "I would not have tried," Mounvey said. "It is the best thing about you. It is the whole thing about you." "Yeah, well," Nell's mouth did the small smile. "The best thing about me is also the thing that's gonna get me up out of this warm room the next time a light flickers, and we both know it, and you're gonna stand at a cold lock and hate it, and I'm gonna go in anyway, and that's just the deal. You want to know the real reason I stayed?" She turned from the window. "It's not the kindness. It's that you're the first place I ever landed that built the thing right after I told them how. The relay, the staged cold, Osk flooding the shaft. You people learned. Most places I worked, you go in, you come out cooked, and next season they send you into the exact same fire the exact same way and act surprised. Here somebody wrote it all down and fixed it. If I've gotta be made for the going in, I'd rather do it somewhere that learns." She sat back down. "So I'll stay till the light flickers, then we'll see what you people learned." The light flickered 11 days later. It was not Vale Asan. Vale Asan's baffles were new, the first of the 40 rebuilt, and they held like the day they were poured. The flicker came over the long-range record, out of a deep city called Thessam Vor on the far side of Seth, a smaller city, an older one whose baffle rebuild had been scheduled for the following year and had therefore not yet happened, and whose luck had run out 1 year early. The pattern was the one everyone in the Concord now knew by heart, because they had all studied Vale Asan the way you study the autopsy. A baffle cracked, a crack cascaded, a caged sun began to pour its fury into the deep levels where the poorest thousands lived closest to the machines. Thessam Vor sent the distress that cold cities now sent, the one the Concord had rewritten in the past year to include a single new line, a line that had not existed before a small human climbed out of a shaft on her elbows. A line that asked, in the calm language of Concord emergencies, whether a fire walker could be reached. Mounvey was in the ward when the record came through, and did not have to go find Nell, because Nell was already standing in the corridor at the viewport, watching nothing, her rebuilt hand already flexing, already closed around an imaginary tow bar, her whole small body already turned toward a fire 19 light years and half a frozen world away. "There it is," she said without turning around. "There's my light." They reached Thessam Vor in 19 hours, which was 18 hours faster than help had reached anyone in a Concord thermal emergency before, because the Concord had spent the year building the thing it had not had when Vale Asan burned, a way to move a fire walker fast. Nell rode it in the back of a courier hull with Mounvey beside her, and a crate of the perfected relay gear bolted to the deck, and she slept most of the way, because a foreman sleeps before the shift, and Mounvey watched her sleep and did not, and thought about the difference between this crossing and the walk to the cold lock a year before. That first time, they had improvised everything in 20 minutes with a city already dying above them. This time there was a courier, and a crate, and a plan, and a whole civilization on the far end that had read the autopsy and meant not to repeat it. Thessum Vor had not read the autopsy well enough, which Nell registered the moment they cleared the dock. "They didn't stage the pods," she said. She was off the courier and moving before Mounvey had the crate unbolted, reading the local command gallery the way she read everything, fast and total, sorting the survivable from the not. The local officials were a knot of panic in the corner, an old cephalopod cool administrator wringing 4 hands, engineers shouting over each other. No relay, no cold staged down the shaft. The distress call had asked for a fire walker, and then the city had simply waited for one to arrive, as if the walker were the whole solution and not the sharp end of a solution the whole room had to build. "They think I'm a machine they ordered," Nell said, flat. "They think you send for me and I fix it. Ask." "Where's Ask?" "Here." Chelu Ask's voice came off the courier's long-range panel. He had not made the crossing, his ruined hand and his desk kept him in Vale Asan, but he had ridden the whole way on the record link, and he had the Thessum Vor schematics up before Nell finished asking. "I have their shaft map. I have been building your relay since we launched. Give me their engineers and I will have cold staged in 11 minutes. Do it. And somebody get me their baffle diagram, because every city's couplings turn a different way, and I'm not learning this one at the bottom." Nell was already stripping down to the thermal neutral layer, already tearing the lining out of it, and the local officials watched the small scarred human undress in their command gallery and did not understand, until the administrator finally found words. "You are the fire walker," the administrator said. "You have come. Thank the cold you have come, now you will." "Now we will," Nell said. "All of us. You included. You're gonna hold doors and stage cold and time a relay because that's the job, and the job was never just me. Anybody in this room who thinks I'm here to save you while you watch can leave now and save me the trouble of tripping over you." She looked at the knot of them, panicked, cold, doomed feeling. "Nobody's leaving. Good. Then here's what we're doing, and Ask's already 3 minutes into building it, so listen fast." Mounvey watched her take the room, the same way she had taken the 12 in the failing shelter, the same way she had taken the engineers on the Vale Asan landing. Not by shouting, never by shouting, but by being the one person present who already knew the order of operations and was not afraid of the fire. Within 11 minutes Thessum Vor had a relay. Within 15, Nell was at the cold lock, and this time the door was held not by one surgeon standing alone in killing air, but by a system a whole civilization had spent a year learning to build. Cold staged down the shaft, Ask on the link timing every pod, the local engineers finally moving with purpose, Mounvey at the lock with a cold cradle, and the medical rack ready for what would come back out. "Same as before?" Mounvey asked her at the door. "Not same as before." Nell put her rebuilt hand flat on the cold lock control. "Before, if I went down and didn't come up, that was the end of it because there was nobody who knew how to come get me. This time you people learned. This time I go in and I trust the door." She looked back once. "That's the whole difference, Mounvey. That's the difference between the going in that kills you and the going in you come home from. Somebody who knows how to hold the door." The small smile. "Hold the door." Then she opened it and walked into the shimmer, and this time Mounvey did not have to guess at the count, because Ask read it over the link the whole way down. She is at the 3rd station. She is at the mount. The cold is holding. The cold is holding. And this time the caged son of Thessum Vor was reset by a small human who came back up the shaft on rebuilt hands that could grip the rungs, into cold that had been driven down to meet her by a city that had learned exactly how, at exactly the right time. So that she crossed the last cold lock on her own 2 feet, scorched and steaming and spent, but walking, but whole, but home. She had lost nothing at the bottom of Thessum Vor except the heat she shed on the way up. No fingers, no hands. The difference between the 2 descents was not her body. Her body had done the same impossible thing both times. The difference was that the second time, the door was held by people who knew how, and a fire walker who goes into the fire with the door held right behind her is a fire walker who comes home. Nell sat down hard against the cold lock in the merely frigid air and laughed once, low and rough, and said, "Huh." She turned her rebuilt hands over and back and found them acceptable. "Came out the same as I went in, first time for that." She looked up at Mounve. "You people really did learn." They went home to Vale Asun, and the word home had quietly become true while no one was watching it happen. Thessum Vor wanted to keep her, of course. Every city with a caged fire wanted its own fire walker now, wanted the small human on the shelf, and the old cephalopod administrator offered her a residency and a title and a warm suite carved out of a cold city, and Nell turned it down the same flat way she turned down everything that smelled like a cabinet. "You don't need me living in your basement," she told him. "You need your baffles fixed, which is next year, and you need to have practiced the relay so the next city over can lend a runner in 19 hours which you just watched work. Keep the pod staged. Learn the timing. Send me home." And they sent her home because she had told them to, and because a city that has just been saved does not argue with the one who saved it, and because, Mounve suspected, some of them had begun to understand the thing Osk had spent a hand learning, that the difference between an ally and a tool is whether you let it go home when the fire is out. Home was a warm room in the medical tier of Vale Asun, and the saved who came to sit on the turning days, and Teln Yarrow heating the gray mash, and a surgeon who had stopped being afraid of heat and started being something Mounve still did not have a clean word for. Reorganized, Osk had said. Mounve had borrowed the word and found it fit. And home was, increasingly, a place other people arrived. The service Nell had designed with her flat refusals. Find the ones already shaped for the going in, offer them the surgery awake, pay them, let them go home, had become real over the year, and the medical tier of Vale Asun, where the branch of practice had been born, was where the first of them came. Mounve performed the surgeries now, the raising of tolerance that had once been a censured improvisation and was now a recognized art, and they performed them on crucible worlders who arrived awake and consenting and were told, every one of them, exactly what would be done and exactly what it would cost and exactly what they would be afterward, and were asked, every one of them, whether they wanted it. Some said no. That was allowed now. That was the whole point. A person who could say no was a person and not an asset. But some said yes because the service found them well, because it looked for the specific shape Nell had named. The ones who, on their own burning worlds, had already been running toward the fire before anyone offered to rewire them. And those ones understood the offer instantly, the way Nell had understood it, as not a burden but a door. The first one to come through was a young man off a grade 17 world, a miner who had pulled his whole crew out of a shaft collapse and a gas fire before he ever left home, and Mounve brought him to meet Nell before the surgery, because it had become a thing they did, the veteran and the new one, the first fire walker and the next. "They tell me you did the first one," the miner said. He was younger than Nell and bigger, and he held himself with the particular stillness of someone who had already been near enough fire to lose the fear of it. "They tell me you climbed 900 meters on your elbows." "They tell it big," Nell said. "It was mostly just not stopping. That's the whole trick if you want it early. It's not the heat, they'll rebuild you for the heat, it's the not stopping. You already know how to not stop or the service wouldn't have found you." She looked at him a while the way she looked at things she was deciding. "You pull your crew out." "All of them, lost the use of a lung doing it. That's why I'm out here, can't mine anymore. Breath's gone for the deep work." He said it without self-pity, a foreman reading a work order, and Mounve watched Nell recognize the cadence, watched something pass between the two of them that no Uthan would ever fully be inside of, the recognition of two animals shaped by two different burning worlds into the same rare thing. "Yeah," Nell said. "Okay, you'll do," she nodded at Mounve. "He's good, best there is. He'll move the line in you and it'll feel like dying, and then you'll wake up and the fire will feel about right, and the first time it does you'll think something's wrong with you and nothing's wrong with you. That's just what it feels like to finally fit the shape you already were." She turned back to the miner. one thing. When they build you a job, make them build the door too, the relay, the held cold. Don't let them send you into anything without somebody outside who knows how to get you back. I learned that one the hard way. She lifted her rebuilt hands, let him see them, the grip that worked and the fingers that never fully closed. This is what going in without the door held costs. You go in with it held, you come home. Make them hold the door. It's the only thing worth insisting on. The heat they can fix. The door they have to learn. The miner looked at her hands a long moment, and nodded and filed it, the way she filed things, as a thing that had begun to exist and would not stop. It was the truest thing anyone had ever told him, and he would carry it into his own first fire and out the other side, and pass it to the one who came after him. Maunve thought about the door a great deal in the year that followed, because the door had become the whole shape of the work. The surgery itself was solved. It was a recognized branch now, taught to cutters from all 40 cities, refined past the desperate improvisation it had been on the night it saved Nell's life. Maunve could perform the raising of tolerance in a controlled theater now, unhurried, with the set point moved by degrees and held and confirmed. None of the arguing with a river panic of that first shift. They had trained 6 other cutters in it. They would train 60. The medicine had stopped being heresy and become craft, and craft, once it exists, does not unexist. There would be crucible world fire walkers in the Concord long after Maunve's own hands were too old for the fine work, and every one of them would trace back to a censured procedure performed on a dying woman that no sound practitioner would have attempted, and Maunve had made peace with being the cutter who attempted it. The ledger had expunged the censure entirely by then, not merely struck it, expunged it, as though it had never been, which was the closest a body of cautious surgeons could come to saying they had been wrong to be cautious. But the surgery had never been the hard part, and Maunve understood that now with the clarity of a full year on the far side of it. The hard part was the door. The surgery gave you a body that could survive the fire. It did not give you a civilization that knew how to send that body in and get it back. That part could not be cut into anyone. That part had to be learned, city by city, relay by relay. The slow, unlovely work of a cold and frightened people teaching themselves to stand at a cold lock and hold cold and time a descent, and drive the recovered chill down a shaft to meet a runner climbing up. The work of becoming, at last, the kind of ally worth being modified for. Nell had said it at the very beginning in the ward before any of it. Everybody who can't take the heat has to stand outside and watch. The whole year had been the Concord learning that standing outside and watching was not the only thing the ones who could not take the heat were permitted to do. They could hold the door. It was not nothing. It was, Nell insisted, everything. It was the difference between the going-in that took her hands and the going-in she walked home from. And she said it to every new walker who came through the medical tier. And she said it to the engineers who came to learn the relay. And slowly, unmistakably, 40 cold cities were learning to hold the door. The Concord changed in ways larger than the 40 cities, too, in the way a moved set point changes everything downstream of it. The word ally, once it existed in the hazard registry schema, did not stay in one file. The clerks who had fought Osk over the column found themselves, within 2 years, adding it to other files, other species, other assessments that the old ledger would have graded only as threats. Because once a bureaucracy learns to ask not merely how dangerous is this thing, but what does its danger do, the question does not turn off, and the Concord that had spent 400 years routing itself carefully around everything that frightened it began, haltingly, to ask which of the frightening things it might instead stand beside. It was not a revolution. The Uthen did not have revolutions. They had baffles and slow recedings and the patient reversal of long inertia. But the ledger was different after Vale Asan, and the difference had a woman's flat sentence under it, and the difference did not reverse. Maunve kept, in the drawer of the theater where they had once logged an impossible procedure to a room slate, the original record of that first night. The censure was expunged from the official file, but Malmve kept their own copy, unexpunged. The sentence and the censure side by side exactly as they had told the ledger history would read them. Patient is in thermal runaway secondary to Pyrrhic world physiology. I am not going to lower her temperature. I am going to raise her tolerance. I am going to change what her body believes is safe. Malmve read it sometimes on the long cold nights and thought about how little they had understood that first night of what they were writing. They had thought they were saving a patient. They had been. But they had also been, without knowing it, writing the first line of a change that ran out past the theater and past Vale Asan, and past the 40 cities into the whole long cautious history of a species that had been afraid of fire since before it had words. The first line of the sentence that a small brown woman had climbed 900 meters to finish. On the turning day at the end of the second year, Malmve found her at the viewport where she was always found, watching the pale sun go down over the frozen towers, and sat with her, because the room had emptied and it was just the two of them, the way it had been at the very start. For a while neither of them said anything. The sun went down the way it did on Seth, slow and pale and enormous, throwing long cold light across the frozen towers, and Nell watched it with the stillness she brought to everything that was not on fire. 2 years, Malmve said finally. 2 years. Nell turned her rebuilt hands over in the light, closed them, found them acceptable. She still did that. Malmve doubted she would ever stop. You know what I keep coming back to, not the shaft. Not the couplings, not the climb, none of the big stuff people want to hear about. I keep coming back to the table. Your table that first night. I was dying and I didn't know it, and you were standing over me making a call nobody in the whole galaxy had ever made, and you made it, and here's the part I think about. She looked at the surgeon. You didn't fix me. Everybody tells the story like you fixed me. You didn't. I wasn't broken. I was a crucible world animal doing exactly what a crucible world animal does when it's cornered, which is throw everything on the fire and refuse to quit, and your whole civilization would have called that a malfunction and cooled it into the ground. You looked at the same thing and called it the point. You didn't fix me, Malmve. You believed me. You believed the thing my body was trying to do was worth keeping alive instead of a fever worth killing. That's the whole surgery. Everything else was just holding the number steady while you decided to trust it. Malmve sat with that a long moment. I have never thought of it that way. Course you haven't, you're a cutter. You think it was the cutting. Nell's mouth did the small smile. It wasn't the cutting. It was that you were the first person in this whole cold, careful galaxy who looked at a body on fire and didn't reach for the water. You reached in and turned up the set point and told a runaway furnace it was allowed to be a furnace. Everybody else my whole life tried to put me out. You're the only one who ever built me a bigger hearth to burn in. She looked back at the sun. That's why I stayed. Not the kindness. The kindness is nice, but I've had kindness. I stayed because you're the only doctor I ever met who understood that some things aren't sick just because they run hot. Would you do it again? Malmve asked. Knowing the hands, knowing the year in a box that never quite closed, knowing the 19 you could not reach, would you let me move the line again? That's not even a question. Nell said it the way she said everything, true, flat, and without heat. The hands work enough. The box never closed because you stood in the door. And the 19, a pause, the flinch landing deep, getting filed. The 19 I carry, you don't get to save everybody. You get to decide the order and live with the order, and I decided the order and I live with it. And I decide it the same way again because it was the right order even though it cost 19. That's the job. Anybody who tells you the going in doesn't come with a cairn of the ones you couldn't reach is selling you something. I do all of it again. Same. Every step. You can put that in your record too, next to the sentence you keep in the drawer. Malmve did not ask how she knew about the drawer. She knew things. She read rooms and she read bodies and she had, somewhere in 2 years, read them. The light flickered. Not the deep-end dying flicker of a slipped collar, Vale Asan's baffles held, would hold for a century, But the long-range record chimed the pattern that every cold city now knew by heart, and a name came up on the panel: another deep city, another baffle a year early on the rebuild schedule, another caged sun testing its collar under another 100,000 lives. And across the medical tier, Mounvey heard the young miner off the grade 17 world come up out of his quarters at a run, because he was the nearest walker now, because the service had built him a job and a home and a door, and this was the 100th day, the day they called. Nell was already up. 2 years of a warm room had not changed the shape of her. The flicker put her on her feet before Mounvey had read the name, her rebuilt hand already flexed and closed around an imaginary tow bar, her whole small body already turned toward a fire she could not yet see. But she did not go to the courier. She went to the young miner, who was pulling on a thermal neutral layer with hands that did not yet know to tear the lining out, and she stopped him with a word, and Mounvey watched the first firewalker do the last thing the story had been building toward without anyone naming it. "Not alone," Nell said. "You've done a mine collapse, you haven't done a caged sun. First one, you don't go alone." She was already stripping down beside him, already tearing his lining out for him, teaching his hands the trick of it. "I go in with you. Not to carry you, you can carry yourself, that's why they found you. I go in so there's somebody in there who's done it, and somebody out here." She jerked her chin at Mounvey, at the engineers, at the whole cold city that had learned, who knows how to hold the door for two. She looked at the miner, steady, the foreman reading a work order. "That's how it goes now. The old ones go in with the new ones the first time, and the cold cities hold the door and everybody comes home. That's the whole trick. It was always the whole trick." The small smile. "Come on. Let's go teach a son some manners." They went down to the courier together, the veteran and the new one, two crucible world animals shaped by two burning worlds into the same rare thing, and Mounvey watched them go, and then went the other way, to the record link, to the relay schematics, to Osk's old console, to the long, unlovely work of the ones who cannot take the heat and have finally learned the only thing they were ever able to give the ones who can. Mounvey went to hold the door. Outside the viewport, the pale sun finished going down, and somewhere across the frozen world, a caged one was slipping its collar, and toward it, calm and unhurried and entirely unafraid, walked the two people in the galaxy who ran toward the thing the galaxy ran from. The conquered had spent 400 years certain that the only sane answer to fire was distance. It had taken a dying woman on a table, and a surgeon who reached into the flames instead of reaching for the water, to teach a frightened civilization the harder answer, that the fire was never the thing to fear. The thing to fear, and the thing to thank, and the thing to finally learn to stand behind, was the small quiet animal who looked at the inferno everyone else was fleeing, and rolled her shoulders and went in.